Okay, we had a great question. Excellent, Bruce. We had a great question last time during the discussion that I've actually been thinking about, and then thinking about thoughts related to it, and then thoughts related to that, and so forth, and different angles to take to explain a whole number of things. And the question I posted, it's on my screen. Let me... there we go. It's on my screen here. I pasted it from before in the discussion from last webinar. And I'll just read it here to start with. David, when setting goals, I have always learned to make the goal challenging, to create motivation, not really knowing how I will accomplish, but having confidence that I'll have the ability to figure it out. And I have a big enough why, i.e. bigger than myself. Also, to state the goal in the present tense and act as if I've already accomplished by visualizing and feeling the emotions of accomplishment. Then put a step-by-step action plan in place like a roadmap. How does your method differ? Okay, and I may have even more to say about this at different times in different weeks. I can only say so much at once. But it got me thinking from a number of angles, and it was such a helpful question because so much of our puzzle together is how do I bridge, right? How do I show you how to go from the ideas that are normally out there and how we look at things when they differ, and then get over to my model of doing things. And so my main bottleneck in that is identifying the model and the models that you guys are coming from. I don't want to act like just because one person asked this question that everyone's thinking this way, but this question is particularly, I think that we all, myself included, have something like this, and we've put together something like this from all kinds of literature out there. It certainly captures so much of the quite reasonable and sometimes great success and goal advice that's out there. But there's a whole number of things that are somewhere I do things differently here, somewhere I do things similarly, and also where there's a number of things I might take into account that aren't normally taken into account. And so this question kind of gives me a little bit of a backdrop. I'm not actually going to be going exactly step by step to this question, but anyhow, it's a great backdrop. And hello, everyone, as people are writing in here. Okay, I'll put this back. Let's see here. So what I want to do is introduce or add to the mix, right, to use some alchemy terminology, the idea of resource management. And that's going to help me also address this question in an interesting way. Let me first skip over to this kind of a little bit of a quick fun thing here. I don't know what to call it because there's not a perfect word for it. People use the word strategy to mean a whole bunch of different things, right? And they use the word strategist on cable news to refer to someone who doesn't really have anything else going for them, right? If they don't have some other title, then they're like a strategist, right? Like a Democrat strategist or a Republican strategist or something like that. So the word kind of gets knocked around a lot and used in all sorts of different watered-down ways. You probably know that I got to the top of the world in Magic the Gathering, right? It's one of my claims to fame back about 20 years ago, maybe 19 years ago now. And then Mike also did that as well. But the funny thing is that normally what I'm going to call, for maybe a lack of a better term, something like deep strategy, normally that's ignored when we look at success training or coaching or books on business and success and so forth. They'll be talking about strategy and philosophy and so forth sometimes, but really the success methods tend to come down to something a little bit more like we might call tactics, but then especially energy and talent, right? Like basically perseverance and not giving up. and having a peak energy state or a mindset that like a can-do mindset or a peak mindset and so forth, right? Everything like perseverance and that sort of mindset is I'm just kind of collapsing that into the idea of energy, right? And then people talk about they want to be motivated and so forth. And so my energy, like kind of on my own, is pretty mediocre. It's certainly not the reason for my success. And then my talent, except for my talent at deep strategy, is also pretty much across the board mediocre. I went to college and I was thinking about becoming a psychiatrist or at least any kind of medical doctor, but I changed my mind. I went to University of Virginia, and they had the top-rated pre-med program at the time. I graduated in 95. I started in 91. But halfway through, I got the bug to be an entrepreneur. I did an internship with a doctor who was very gracious and took me on over just for a week over my spring break toward the end of my second year. And then about the same time, my closest friend at the time, not Mike Long, somebody else, from high school kind of got the entrepreneurial bug, and he was pretty persuasive. And that was back in the days of Dom Lapre and his infomercial. And if you just can place a tiny classified ad, and if it can make some money, then you can do that, and all over the place. And somehow I really got the bug to go off on my own. And when I did the internship, the doctors were working like 60-hour weeks, and they said it was all about covering your butt, like legally at this point. And that was right when a different form of socialized medicine was becoming popular, right about the time of Clinton becoming elected and so forth. And so from a number of reasons and angles, and I had gotten pretty much all A-minuses, which is good enough to get into med school, but I got a B- in psychobiology lab, which ended up being kind of like a humanities course where it wasn't good enough. I got my objective wrong. I didn't realize. I thought the grade would basically be based on completing the lab each time correctly and explaining it right, but it turned out it was more about being enthusiastic for like staying the whole time for each lab session, which was exactly the opposite of what I thought in essence, because I would look to be completing my lab efficiently and effectively and be done, but that kind of backfired. So I learned a lesson from that. And even one B- makes it a real pain. I presumably still could have gotten into med school if I kept at it, but you really need close to like an A- average, and it's pretty tough to do. So anyhow, a whole bunch of factors got me the entrepreneurial bug. But there I was, and I didn't realize I was also told by my family that, and this was more true like at the time and 10 years before that and so forth, that if you just had that degree, that's all you need, David, that degree. And like a liberal arts degree and so forth. So I graduated with basically no talent. Oh, well, by the time I graduated, I had put together my speed reading and memory course, my accelerated learning course, and I made about $10,000 doing that, which is astronomical when you're in college. So I developed something, but at the time I wanted to be an entrepreneur, which was between my second year and my third year, and in university. Then I had nothing whatsoever, and then even when I had the speed reading and memory, I had nothing else, right? So it was that or nothing, and there was no internet that I was aware of at that time. Technically there was, but I didn't really have much of a computer interest or background. People that had just happened to get really into computers when they were around when I was in high school, and when they were like, if when I was in high school I'd had a bug for computers, which I didn't, then that would have been super. But so I didn't really have much of anything in the way of talent, and I'm not like inherently a great salesperson or particularly technical or whatever else works for a talent. And then I didn't have something I really learned that was very helpful. I had an interdisciplinary degree, which included a lot of science courses, which was helpful in understanding evolutionary theory, which I got interested in, versus like intelligent design and creation theory. But it wasn't something that anyone really wanted to pay for. For someone to pay for it, you have to get a PhD in science, or else go to med school, right? So with and then it kind of stayed that way, where I didn't really have a lot of talent, although there was something I kind of parlayed eventually, which had to do with how learning and how the mind really works. So I guess that's something. But mainly it's been this deep strategy, and even trying to figure out how the mind works, it's the same type of deep strategy as I'll get into here. So it's really been my whole angle, and it's crazy because I'm always in awe of even outsourcers that I work with, but for sure the coaches and Mike Long, and then the coaches for OMG. Their talent kind of awes me. I feel like it's so far past mine. I'm not like being self-defacing. I'm quite confident in my ability with this kind of deep strategy. But other than that, I mean, I just seeing what they do and what they accomplish is pretty amazing. And then I mentioned I had the one Rolls Royce. I actually temporarily have two because I have a lease still on the previous one for several more months. So I had this one, which recently some people were talking about having a Wraith like in our general niche, but there's a Rolls Royce Wraith. So this is the car I've been driving for the past year past year or so. Here's the inside. Cotton took this picture here. It's pretty cool. It has this like starlight headliner on it. And then now I have, and this is on a lease, but then I paid off and I own the convertible, which came out. And this is kind of a picture of the inside of my particular convertible from the PDF from when I designed it. It's pretty nifty. Arguably one of the best looking cars on the road really these days. So with basically no talent except for what I'm sharing with you in Alchemy, pretty much purely with Alchemy and everything I'm showing you already and what I'll be showing you, then I did all this without really. And so you, with whatever talent you have, which is almost certainly going to be significantly more than mine, then you're going to be in terrific shape. But it also means there's a certain angle on strategy that I take, and one of the reasons it's so effective is kind of ironic, is that it looks wrong generally, right? And I've touched on this when I've talked about like foundationalism, and I'll continue to touch on that today. Your brain is all wired to, and the way it works is to kind of create a foundation out of thin air, out of nothing, out of like triangulating, out of the inputs it gets. And in order for you to move forward and survive and so forth, and it specifically doesn't want you to look down, right? You know how if you're climbing climbing up somewhere high, right, or walking on like a trellis somewhere high, what do they tell you? Don't look down, right? And so that's kind of how your brain is it's telling you not to look down, unless there's a certain rewiring that we're looking to do in Alchemy that I've done for myself, where that'll start to work in your favor rather than against you, where your brain will where it'll all be okay. It won't be a struggle all the time to think foundationally and with deep strategy. But until and unless you do that, and it doesn't generally happen, what'll pass for strategy is either tactics or what people will do is they'll get outside of one box, or they'll climb down from one local mountain peak and then get onto a higher one, but then they generally won't really generalize that and say, oh wow, what else could be out? To some degree, people will say what else can be out there, but there's some way that people will stop digging and looking for another and better peak or foundation, and they'll get to where they just want to kind of make what seems like forward progress and not look down anymore. And there's a way that I want to show you how to do things differently, where you can, I'm being a little bit tongue-in-cheek here, but you can kind of always be looking down. Or to put it better, you can start by getting to the foundation, which that part I'm doing with you. It's apparently, just from going by the sheer numbers of people not doing it, it's virtually impossible to do on your own. And it seems like my extreme talent to get to the bottom of things in this way. But I'll walk you through that. But then once you're there, once you get kind of the deep foundation, and you've already gotten a lot of it, and we'll keep on hitting it from different angles and looking at it, building on it, and building around it, and so forth. But once you have that, which I can walk you through, then you won't have to figure that out, and you'll have a lot of the stuff that relates to the deep foundation also already built, because the stuff you build directly on your deepest foundation, stuff like understanding how the mind works and how goals work, like we're continuing to talk about now, that is so close to the foundation and it's so pervasive that we'll build that too. And so in Alchemy, we'll build a whole bunch of layers off of the foundation together so that you'll be able to approach your individual tasks and goals and things you want to accomplish with so much of the deeper foundation already built that you can stay foundational. And once you make that shift to where everything's built from the ground up, so to speak, in this way, then you're never, until and unless you really get this properly, your brain keeps wanting to shift back. It's like, are we ready to be reckless yet? Are we ready to just stop looking down yet and just assume what we assume and just move forward? Your brain's going to keep wanting to do that. It's going to keep having this goal that's fighting you, or this perspective. I don't know the best word for the moment to say that, but it's going to keep telling you that you're doing things wrong when you're looking foundationally and building up properly, until you fully let go of thinking that you want to stop building from the foundation up. Once you internalize or kind of fully get that you can get all the way to all of your goals by never leaving the strategy of building from the deepest foundation up, where each layer is solid. And I refer to the idea of stipulating. I'm not going to get into it now, but it's all going to work out just great and very practically. And I'm already getting reports back constantly that even for what I've shown you and the idea of the goalscape and all kinds of stuff, the helplessness, the defense against the defense, it's all helping people great. But this is all going to be very doable, right? And stipulating is going to be one of our ways that's going to work for doing that. But as long as it seems valid for you to approach goals non-foundationally, then it'll kind of always seem more appealing in an illusionary, in an unhelpful, in a counterproductive way. Once we see that it's invalid, and that's part of what I mean about bridging, is I need to help you or help explain and communicate to you how certain ideas that are so pervasive and common, like this idea that our brain gives us where we already have a foundation, don't look down, let's just move forward and be comfortable with certain assumptions and get agitated if someone starts to dig into our core beliefs and core assumptions. That has to be understood by you to be totally invalid in order for you to stick with the right method only. And again, I can testify to you that I've gotten where I've gotten, and I have these cars as like extra, right? I didn't mess with my stable base. I have my whole financial life planned out as a stable base reasonably, not step by step, just with a very simple outline, right? X amount of money to get to 60, and then a guaranteed income after I'm 60. Very simple. So that's all in place too. And another kind of application or example application of strategy, and also just another kind of reason why it's going to make sense to trust me whether or not I seem like something I'm sharing is exactly right or not. But you don't have to trust me ultimately. Just all I mean is to just keep going. Just keep with me. Listen to the webinars. Basically, is all I really need you to ever trust me on. All right. So with that preamble, I'm going to do this slide with you, and then the next slide will address one of the specific things from that question. All right. So what I wrote on this slide is life as resource management, or even if you just take the life as, if we very close to the foundation of understanding life is you can look at it as a resource management game. Also, I could have crossed out life, or you can make a note for yourself, and we can also look at strategy as resource management. Resource management can kind of fully cover or be one kind of full angle on what strategy comes down to. And just once I show you explain what I mean, and it might already be self-evident, but this will be one of those alchemy moments or alchemy building blocks where it'll clear up just by looking at that question that I posted in the beginning. From the foundation, not even from the lens, but when you're standing on the foundation of the idea of resource management, then a lot more will become clear. All right. The deep strategy distinction. All right, let's picture for a moment that, let's just picture a potential video game where just kind of a generic idea of like a video game where you're controlling maybe some like tribe or civilization or a group of people or something, race, and you start with a city and you have maybe some workers and so forth. And then there's different resources in the game like gold and food and maybe magic crystals and then you might need to harvest those in order to build certain buildings, and those buildings can help store resources. They can help you make troops to maybe conquer more territory, so that might potentially give you more resources, right? Maybe land itself to build your buildings is itself a resource. And then it'll follow that other things will turn out to be a resource too, like your potential army to protect yourself or to go take more territory, right? All right, so if you have a game roughly like that, hopefully everyone can picture that. Doesn't have to be perfectly at all, just kind of in general, if you can picture that as a backdrop. Then, what are some of the things that have to be asked? Well, one would be, well, what's the end goal, right? How do I win that game? Do I defeat all the enemies? Do I compile a certain amount of resource? Do I build my population to a certain level? Do I make them all totally happy to a certain degree, right? If that's, in the game, their happiness. We have to ask, so how do you win, right? If people were looking at life with a deep strategy and related to that as a resource management game, so to speak, then it would occur to them to ask, well, how do I win? And you could theoretically just make up a way to win, but if you do that, that kind of turns the game into a mockery or nonsense. What if I say, well, I win the game if I have 2 workers? I start out with, let's say I start out with 1 and enough gold to buy another one, right? And then I just buy another worker, and there I won. In my own little, I can just define my terms however I want. And yet, if you read between the lines, or sometimes this is just stated overtly, from all over the place, different philosophies, different success philosophies, even religious speakers, it'll boil down to that, if you think about it, is just arbitrarily pick your own standard, just come up with what success means to you, and then if you achieve that, you win. Right? And again, they don't necessarily put it in those terms, but think about that, right? I already just kind of proved how that makes a mockery out of the whole situation. If that was the case, just declare yourself a winner right now, right? If you have 5 fingers, you win. Be happy for the rest of your life. Ecstatically happy based on the fact you have 5 fingers. What's the difference between that and saying, well, if I can just make the world a better place, right? Because then you can, that's arbitrary too. You can just define that however the heck you want, right? If I, contribute to the building of electric cars, right? Electric cars is great. I have no issue with any number of ways to make the world better. But if we just declare that we've won, that the objective is to make the world better, and then we just make up our own standard for what the heck that means, right? Or people say, well, of course, one of the, and 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, the book, is a great book. Never cutting it down or anything like that. It helped me tremendously. But one of the chapters is begin with the end in mind, right? Like think about, all right, you died and people are eulogizing you, and what are they saying about you, and what do you want them to say? But if you do that exercise, you're just going to be doing what I just showed is ultimately nonsensical, is you just come up with your own standard of what defines winning. And that doesn't really make any sense. And if it did make sense, then why aren't you ecstatically happy every moment? If you can just come up with your own standard, if there's nothing objective about why we're here and what we're trying to accomplish, than just do the 5-figure thing. Or one speaker who I respect a lot, but they said, like one guy said, well, I wake up each day, and as long as I'm not 6 feet under, if I'm above ground, I'm still alive, then that's great, I'm happy. But ultimately, we just can't live that way. Like the reality is, neither that teacher, that guru that said that, nor anyone else is just ecstatically happy all the time, right? And if that worked, then they would be, right? So we can't just come up with our own standard. And yet again, literally everywhere, that's what's going to be between the lines. Even from the question, that's going to be between the lines in this question. When setting goals, I've always learned to make the goal challenging to create motivation, right? And so forth. Oh, well, let me finish at least the sentence. Not really knowing how I will accomplish, but having confidence that I have the ability to figure it out. And I have a big enough why, bigger than myself. Well, it's a little bit like one of the things I thought of as I was thinking about how to explain this point is about how people, these days, if you ask people if they trust the news, the media, then virtually everyone will say no, right? Like 90+% of people or so will say like no these days. But the media is still extremely powerful for deciding how people think. And one of the ways is just inherently they kind of decide, for people that are looking at the media at all, what's important and what isn't, right? And so they end up defining the conversation in a way that you can reject on the surface everything they're saying, but still be very strongly influenced by some deeper implications of what they're covering, what they're not covering, what questions they're asking, right? And so forth. Similarly, within this question is ignoring completely the idea of figuring out what actually the bottom line goal needs to be in life. What's the foundation? But that's the first question you'd obviously ask in any resource management game, wouldn't it? It would just be ridiculous to not ask that question, and yet people don't ask it in life, or they do, but their answer is always some form of you come up with your own standard. Perhaps an exception to that, I'm just thinking about this as I'm talking here, is, well, like choose to have a relationship with God, right? But then that kind of just kicks in practice, and I think that's an immensely important decision. And I to the extent that I actually talk about it in Alchemy and devoted a whole webinar, and I'll talk about it more. I'll probably do it specific and maybe separate, or maybe just much later in the series after I cover other things. But I'll continue with the idea of knowing that God exists. And the more we accept this, I understand this idea of foundationalism, the more it begins to make sense why, if we look at life as a resource management game, then questions like, well, does God exist, and what's the basic nature of God, or what's the nature of God? It starts to become a very important or potentially important question, just, again, from a resource management point of view. It only is unimportant if you're not thinking of life as a resource management issue. In other words, if you're not thinking of life strategically. A tactician is trying to make the best do with kind of the assumptions and resource and the playing field they're put on. That's tactics. The battlefield is pretty much defined. The weapons are already defined, mostly. And then you're trying to do the best you can with that. When you're doing tactics, you're not looking down. You're not looking behind you, so to speak. You're kind of in the moment, or with just a certain amount of defined planning. You're trying to maximize within a box. Deep strategy is when you're done with boxes, or unless you are assured of victory within the box you're in, you're looking for some other way. And you need to make damn sure that you know the objective properly. And just because, like with tactics, if let's say you're just following orders, well, within the defined scenario, that can be fine. But you can do something where that's good tactics, following orders, but overall it's counterproductive for life, for your life, or for other people, and so forth. So using good tactics does not assure you victory. It could even be literally counterproductive. It could even take you backward, even using proper tactics, right? If you're in a war and you're given orders and use great tactics, but those orders turn out to be counterproductive for your life or the overall picture in life, then you took yourself backwards. Could be the same thing when you're trying to make money. Could be the same thing where you could be using great tactics to get a girl to hop into bed with you, but that could be totally counterproductive for having the relationship that you really want, right? So winning within a box, within a defined thing, can be tactical, but that doesn't mean you win overall. And making sure you're going to have a real victory, which means you have to figure out the real objective, right? And within a game, that's fine. A game is defined in a way that that you figure out the objective for the game. But then in life, it's necessarily true that people can't be approaching it strategically. They're only approaching it tactically, unless they've defined the right end goal, which we've covered many times. And that's why it feels so freeing and differently powerful, especially because I pointed out the whole helplessness and defense against the defense thing too. But we have to get that asked. Otherwise, we just can't manage resources. We can't understand what resources are good for, and we can't value them properly and use them in the right way or anything if we don't even know the objective. But literally, people don't even start there. So there's a way that people must not be acting strategically. Oh, I mentioned on the relationship with God thing, but then in practice, so I fully agree with that statement about the critical thing is to have the right relationship with God. But in practice, where does that end up? We still define that, right? That isn't self-explanatory. And so then people come up with their own standards on what it means to have a relationship with God, right? Once again, we need to figure out if we really care about God and care about our relationship with God, then we need to care enough to understand God, which means we need to understand, once again, about God. We need to understand about what's going on fundamentally. And let me remind you, or if you haven't seen it, it might be the first time you're hearing it, when we understand how it works with God, God is actually always aware of everybody's consciousness field. And consciousness field is not a mysterious or new age word. It's just what you're aware of, all right, what you're experiencing, how you feel, what you're seeing visually with your senses, externally, internally, and so forth in the moment. God's aware of how everyone feels, meaning that if anyone's in pain emotionally or physically, God feels that. God has to suffer. So that's a pretty important thing to understand. I give that to you as an example of if someone hasn't figured that out in a clear, distinct way, and generally people aren't really aware of that, then how is it that they're being strategic in the way of, well, if you love God, their love would be very limited because they're not even trying to understand really about what's going on. And if someone's really seeking, excellent, and they just haven't figured it out yet, great. And none of this is to be critical. I'm just talking about ideas here. Never, ever should anything I say be interpreted as judging a person morally in general. I could be judging a particular idea or action, which is based on acting on an idea, as moral or correct or not. If it can be judged as such, if foundationally we can show how it's wrong or right. We have to be able to judge ideas. And we have to be able to decide what we're going to do and so forth. But we never know enough to judge somebody else overall morally because we don't know where they're coming from. We don't know how hard they, we don't know where they're starting from, basically. And we all have plenty to go to figure things out, myself included, of course. And I've been figuring things out, and I figured out a bazillion things that I had wrong over the last 20 years or so. And I'm still going. Okay. As a kind of parallel or aside here, the critical thing I'm going to constantly need to do for you is show you how the kind of normal or alternative way of doing things, opposite what I'm showing you, can't be right. And so part of why I'm saying the things I'm saying here on this slide is because if you're thinking, well, maybe people are strategic already, or I already know what strategy is, or yeah, I already get resource management, then I needed to try to show you just now, and what I've already said, of how there's a way that people aren't, or they would have arrived at certain conclusions already, presumably, or at least they're not doing it effectively. So we need to figure out the end goal, and the only end goal that's foundational is the one, right? Is no more bad, max happiness in the sense of no more bad, no more contradictions for everybody. And then good can keep on going. Good's actually unlimited. You can always create more nice stuff. You can always make another video game that people can play and enjoy, or whatever else people might like out there. Nice food and so forth. You can go on vacations and have fun time with people you care about, or have more people you care about, and give them more massages, right, or whatever it might be. So good can be unlimited while still getting rid of the contradictions and bad ideas, and then getting to a point where we're just creating more good. And that can be how the whole world is. And that's the reason why we have free will. That's why God has set things up the way God has set things up, in order to allow for all that. And that's why we're here. That's what we're trying to do. Once you have that goal in place, and this can help me to give some more about the goalscape. A little bit meandering here from my slides, but it's just some things that I just get to as I build to them, which is the same way I tell you to do things as you build. And sometimes I don't know where building is going to take me, actually, constantly. I know the final fruit. Anyhow, so this just kind of built me over to the goalscape for a moment. It might not be immediately obvious, to say the least, that goals are necessary for anything else to have meaning, to learn. Your mind needs goals. Your mind can't function without goals. It's not a mistake that your mind has goals. It needs them. It can't process anything otherwise. It can't. Goals give meaning. Even to literally, it can't see, basically, without goals. Like even visually, it can't really make sense out of the world. And so you need to be like standing on some goal in order, and your mind does as well, to go to the next step, to see, to think, to make meaning out of anything. So if you want to look out onto the goalscape, you can't even do that without some goal that you're standing on. If you're standing on anything but the correct bottom line foundational goal, then you're going to be adrift. I don't yet know. I actually plan to come back to this in a future webinar and explain this even better. But there's something about me saying this that I think will be helpful for you. If you're trying to stand on a different goal that isn't inherently foundational, like I just want to have my family prosper, or I want to make a certain amount of money, or I just want to be happy, but you haven't really figured out what that means. If it's blurry, then your mind can then define it however it wants to. And your mind will basically end up running the show if you don't figure out how to get the foundation correct. That's why I need to explain this stuff to you in this way. I need to cover these ideas in order to teach you how to do make a lot of money with consulting. My whole advantage is built on standing in the right place and building up from there. Then I understand how to look at goals. I understand how to be calm and confident, not frustrated. I understand how not to go on tilt and go off on people. And I understand what other people are going through and how they're processing things. And that gives me an overwhelming advantage when I'm joint venturing, or when I'm even just trying to learn something technically for me to do, or I'm trying to fulfill my end of the bargain so that people are happy with me so they want to partner with me. So that's where I build up from. So this is how I do it. Even all the mundane stuff I built in this way. That's why I kind of reminded you of the Rolls Royces for fun. Again, I built there this exact way. And there's no other way I can get there besides the way I'm building for you. I mean, of course, I might be able to put my slides in a different order, but I mean, these foundational ideas are the only way. They are the only way to do deep strategy, which is the only way to do strategy. You either win before you start, or you're not going to be guaranteed to win. There isn't a success formula outside of this one that's going to guarantee your success. The traditional success formulas, what they'll do, including even my own shortcut that I gave you, the success formula shortcut, I think that's even the literal name of the video in the 2013 series. But I might have the wording slightly off on that, but it's easy to identify. And I even plan to touch on it in the next slide, where I talk about like the idea of that's mentioned in the question about why a challenge. So I have a similar but different take on the making the goal challenging. But okay, so perseverance, having a goal bigger than yourself, believing the impossible, also all sorts of things. Those will expand you out of your current box, and as long as the expansion that the success mindset, positive thinking, belief, having more sense of motivation, being in more of a peak state, as long as that's going to take you out of your box into a bigger box, and maybe into 2 or 3 bigger boxes removed. As long as success can be achieved within that expansion, then the formula will work. But there's all sorts of times when the success actually won't be achieved, even 2 or 3 boxes removed. And that's where alchemy comes in, is I'm trying to get you out of all the boxes, so you're standing on the actual foundation, and then all actual possibilities. Some things are impossibilities. Some things are literal contradictions, whether they're impossibilities. But possibilities are differently open to you. People are restricting themselves and also hedging their bets and also having multiple conflicting goals, right? That really deep goal that I plan to have a whole webinar on soon, and maybe multiple ones, because whatever it takes to get rid of the thing about the self-image and already being right, already being smart, and related to that, stuff about justice and fairness for people that wrong you. It's kind of, I think that that's a related thing, or whether or not it's related, that's another thing that really gets in people's way. John Susko had a good post and question about that in that Alchemy 5 thread, and posted a whole bunch of questions that I'll use as well as I continue. There's a reason why I scheduled over 30 webinars for us. But I was saying that that self-image goal about already being right and already being smart and already being good, all the success literature, it doesn't deal with that well enough. Separately, as I was talking about the goalscape just now and how you need to stand on some goal, you also, so if you stand on any other goal besides the correct one about max happiness, or however you want to phrase it, but it's all, it means one thing, then it's arbitrary, and your mind's going to take over, and you're not going to get to where you need to go. And it's going to take over with its default functioning that only wants to go forward, basically. And you're going to be locked out of all sorts of options, and you're going to have all sorts of things get in your way, especially this self-image thing. The other approach that sometimes is tried to be taken with some success philosophies, or just philosophies, but every philosophy is basically a success philosophy, right? If you think about it, then is the idea of detaching from all of it and just being the observer, or some sort of thing like that, having like pure awareness. So it's phrased in different ways, but that's why I said you need to have some goal. You cannot have like pure awareness without having some goal that you're dealing with. Nothing has meaning. And then if we look at from this idea of resource management, think about your pure awareness. You're just the observer. You're totally detached from all goals. and now you're trying to do resource management. You can't, because resources, by logic, everything has no meaning. Resources have no meaning. They have no value. Nothing can have value if you're just the observer, if you're detached from all right and wrong, all goals. It can feel relaxing for a moment, but you can't get anywhere from there ultimately, and you can't live that way. So there actually needs to be a goal. There needs to be one goal, fundamentally, that you're standing on. And then you look out in the goalscape. Everything else is more like a strategic objective, and it's more like a stipulative or inherently potentially temporary strategic objective. Every other thing that we think of as goals, again, we can kind of rename into a strategic objective or strategic goal or whatever. Because you are being strategic in a deep way, deep strategy starts with standing in the right place, figuring out what the heck the objective is, and then it's all resource management at that point. But now let's go back to that computer game. Right, where you're like a tribe and you have like a city or a base, or you're whatever, some group of people, right, that you're controlling, some army or whatever, and potential army, whatever. And then there's resources, right, gold, food, magic crystals, and then you use those to build up more resources like explored territory, maybe territory you control, buildings, troops, maybe workers. In order to manage your resources, where you're always needing to make alternative use decisions, right? You want to use one resource, or how do you use your resources most strategically? In order to do that, you need to figure out, well, what's the priority? What can I get from this? What else can I get for this resource, right? Resource management, I don't have this written down, but it always comes down to alternative use. That people can easily affirm that intellectually. What else could I use the resource for? But in practice, if you're working through your own plans and your own thinking, notice during this week, very constantly people don't look at alternative use, because when you understand the default functioning of how your brain works, it's trying not to get you to look for that stuff so you can move forward. If you're sitting there trying to figure out all the different alternative uses of a resource, then according to your brain normally, you're not accomplishing enough. You're not moving forward in the right way. You're not climbing your local peak properly. So actually, people are not making alternative use decisions very often or very well. And as we think about alternative use, or if we think about that game, and if we're trying to master that game, then we need to understand more and more details about the game. There might even be something that comes up that we're exploring, and we find some cave where all of a sudden it becomes very important to have wizards in order to defeat some monster that gets us some massively powerful artifact. And in order to make wizards, we had to have started building buildings ahead of time, and it meant that magic crystals were a lot more valuable than we thought. And we would never know that until we figured out all those details about the cave existing and that artifact, and that was going to give us such an advantage. So in that way, when we're looking at things from resource management, then the devil often is in the details, so to speak. That there's all sorts of details that might be critically important that you don't know until you poke around and keep poking around. And you keep poking around. And basically, you keep on building your understanding, which involves doing and taking action, right? You don't just stare at the screen on pause in order to build your understanding. You can't just read the manual and find out enough, right, for the video game. Reading the manual is great, and you do also want to do that. But then you also need to play the game, and you need to keep poking around, and you need to keep building your understanding until you win. And then maybe there's an overall objective where you're trying to win even better, right, and so forth. And as your understanding improves, the different details help you to establish a better and better framework. At some point when you start out with playing the game, you hardly even know what's going on at all. At some point you have an idea of generally what's going on. all right, I generally need gold for this, I generally need crystals for this and food for that, and I'm generally building up an army, and the opponent is doing something similar and they're exploring, okay. So you have a framework, and then until you have that framework, I've talked about this before, then the details, you want to act in a way where you realize you don't even have a framework, that the details are used to try to assemble the framework. But then after you have a framework, you're still building your understanding, and it's building and building and building until you win. And there isn't ever a time when you need to stop building your understanding, because you can be taking action. You can be making money in real life, not in the game, right? But you can be in a romantic relationship and having a great time. You could be doing all sorts of stuff. But you want to look at life as you're always building your understanding of resources in order to win. And you'll know you have enough understanding when you've won. And if you don't look at life that way, then your brain is always fighting you, and it's exhausting constantly when you're trying to be deeply strategic. And your brain just wants to go tactical on you and say, stop, just make all these assumptions, just go with how you already feel, or which is what your brain's telling you, right? Your brain's trying to get you to listen to your brain. And it always just kind of come up with different angles on that. Like, oh, listen to your intuition. The truth is already inside of you, right? The truth will fill itself in as you create. So in that way, believing that it's inside of you kind of approximates that. But the problem is you end up coming back around to your brain running the show whenever you're whenever you feel like seeking understanding, which can involve taking action, as I keep pointing out, is you're kind of impatient about it, or it's like a necessary evil, then you haven't rewired yourself, and by self I mean your brain, not you as the conscious being, or your mind. You haven't rewired it enough. You haven't made it distinct enough that the tactical way is invalid, and distinct enough about the standing on the right goal. And then but as that becomes more distinct, as you can see how it's invalid to stand anywhere, and invalid in a way that just counterproductive, just pointless. And this is how you end up getting the control you want over your mind, and over others. I would never call it control, but you're creating win-win-wins with yourself and other people through understanding what they want, what they really want, what's better, what's ultimately better for them and everything, plus what they think they want, plus what's going to be a win for you, a win-win-win. Then you get the effect of what you're looking for control over others, but in a way that is more effective by far. And you never need to be frustrated, because no one could stop you from seeking and building understanding in this way. And you can further, I'm going to keep on looking at different angles on what I mean by seeking understanding and building understanding. But this resource management thing is a major new angle that you can look at it from. Because if you're understanding more about resources, and then you understand there's more resources than you thought too. But some of the pretty obvious resources, that's why God might be a resource, right? In some way, prayer. Or there might be resources that are that we wouldn't think of if we understand that God exists, that we would incorrectly call supernatural, right? If God exists, God is kind of more natural than anything else, if you think of it that way, right? So God's completely natural if God exists, rather than starting with like nature and kind of worshiping that by accident. But anyhow, there might be a whole bunch of resources related to God and prayer or spiritual gifts we might have and so forth that might be an important part of the puzzle. Or it might just help us figure out other resources. But it's certainly a clearly valid place to poke and to try to understand about once we look at life as resource management. Other things, another one that's obvious is stuff like goal and the mind. Right, goals, the idea of goals, the idea of the mind, and how it works. Pretty obviously, that's one of the places that we want to have a deep and comprehensive understanding, because it's fairly obvious, just even, just from a quick glance, that there's all sorts of potential resources have to do with our mind and our thoughts and so forth, right? And then goals, right, are pretty clearly intertwined with all that. So that's why I'm talking about this and why I've focused on it for so long, in decades, understanding goals and the mind better and better, is because from a resource management point of view, it's just clearly a big deal. And then I wrote these two things here. They're kind of different ways of saying the same thing. And basically the answer is to this is if we're just in a rush, right? So we don't want to be in a rush ever. But if we are, then we need to say, all right, I'm going to stipulate that the way the foundation seems to be, the parameters, the goal that I think I need to do by this deadline, I'm going to stipulate that's correct. Stipulating is different than assuming. I'm not assuming it's true. I'm just saying I'm going to act as if it's true for now. And then we just operate within the box that we're in if we're in a rush, right? If there's a time limit, then you can't just be poking around to bigger and bigger boxes. But what we want to do, as I've pointed out in different places, is get time on your side overall in life. And clearly people just don't always need to be in a rush, right? A lot of what people are in a rush about is just running in circles, right? Like some event that's happening tonight, right, that needs to be prepared for, and then the event's over and it's all just one big circle. And then maybe we make the money for that. We had to be in a rush to make more money to spend it on a vacation, and then we're all harried planning for the vacation and doing that, and and so forth. So we can declutter and create the time, the space, the mental space, the creativity to not have to ignore the greater context and not just have to be a tactician, or we could be a deep strategist. And again, I testify to you that this is how I've gotten the results that I've gotten without other talent and without a lot of energy. When do we ignore foundations and our final objective? Again, I'm just restating this. When do we ignore the greater context? These are just kind of restatements of each other. If you're in a rush, if you're about to be totally screwed, if you're starving, you need to have enough money where you're not starving, or figure out a way to live without food or get it for free or something or other. But something where there's not a big emergency and a big rush. But outside of that, then no, you can build up from foundation, period, always, as your only strategy. And that's going to become so much more practical and possible as you complete alchemy. Because like I mentioned earlier, we're going to build so much of the foundational stuff that's so hard to figure out on our own, including for me, right? It took me for a long time to figure out what I'm sharing with you here. It's kind of maybe a little hard to get, but on the other hand, a little obvious. It might not seem like it was as hard as it, like I even took like all week working on that question, even just to get some of the things I'm talking to you here. I didn't arrive at a lot of it for days. But I'm doing that, and I'm saving you thousands of hours, tens of thousands really. Maybe you could have done it a lot quicker, but regardless, at least tens of thousands of what took me tens of thousands of hours. I'm saving you all that, and no wonder people don't do it, and no wonder people's brains just say, whoa, don't go there, right? Let's just move forward, because it is quite an undertaking, but it was doable, and it's sure as heck doable for you because you have me to walk you through it. But we'll have so much context built up, so much foundational stuff, that it will become practical to actually build from real foundational stuff, rather than just having to say, I don't want to think about that, I'm going to ignore it, I'm just going to go bulldoze forward. Okay, I will cover this, get into this next slide here, and then I'll go into the discussion portion of our program. It's funny, every webinar, and I suspected this might happen for a while. I don't know if it'll ever go on the downswing with this, but it's like every webinar, I feel like there's more things for us to talk about rather than less. But that's, again, why I scheduled lots of time for us to spend together. I think I'm quite happy with all the things that I pointed out on this webinar. So, we have to say something rather than something else. There's no alternative use. If I cover one thing, I don't cover something else, but we have the time to cover all kinds of great stuff during this whole time. All right, let's take a look. I'll refer back to the question here. David, when setting goals, I've always learned to make the goal challenging to create motivation. Not really knowing how I'll accomplish it, but having the confidence that I have the ability to figure it out, and I want to have a big enough why, bigger than myself. Also, to state the goal in present tense and act as if I've already accomplished by visualizing and feeling the emotions of accomplishment. Okay, I'm not going to talk much about the step-by-step action plan right now, although I inherently did. If you think about what I've talked about, my step-by-step action plan has to do with building out my understanding foundationally until the result gets achieved, or until I can just reach out and it's so obvious how to just zoom to my result. Right? There's the roadmap just kind of reveals itself so clearly that I just walk over to it. And maybe it even takes a week, but I just go do it, just go get it. But until it's totally clear and distinct how to just get your result, just keep building your understanding. And then you will hit a point, and I've done this over and over and over and over and over and over again, day in and day out with simple, not even simple, or day-to-day issues that come up, or overall big things I try to accomplish, is you build understanding until it's just the path is so obvious and clear, you just boom. All right, you just go get it. That's where I talk about winning before you attack. So there's my step-by-step action plan, so to speak. But I have a lot more to say about that in future webinars. But for this slide and for this webinar, I want to make one kind of major point about this idea of let's look at the main points. Challenging to create motivation, not really knowing how I'll accomplish it, but having confidence that I have the ability to figure it out, and I have a big enough why, bigger than myself. Also, I'm stating the goal in present tense, and I act as if I've already accomplished by visualizing and feeling the emotions of accomplishment. Okay. So in my results formula shortcut, I talk about something called creative tension that you do want to build. You do want to get a lot of what that exercise that's described in that question does is it gets your mind focused, right, on that goal, and it gets the mind's resources marshaled toward that goal, and it kind of will tend to the better you do it, the more it'll kind of deprioritize things, like your goal to feel smart and good and so forth. However, goals like that are going to get triggered in your goal for feeling justice and fairness and so forth. Which is counterproductive and false once you understand it. This question, the way it's phrased, ignored, I know I a little bit mentioned this before, but I need to point this out. It ignores things like that. They're going to get in your way. And it tries to overcome that reality by having like a bigger battery, right? Like more momentum, more energy, whatever. My method differs in that, yeah, I want to have a nice battery, that I do some version that's quite similar to this, in some cases identical, in some cases not quite. But the thing that's not quite is making the goal challenging. Making a goal challenging, once in a while that's applicable. When it comes to like income, then making it challenging has the benefit of helping get you out of your kind of assumptions and conceptual box more, because like when Cotton imagined a version of himself that had a $100 million SEO business, then that was a great exercise. And then he asked himself questions, that imaginary self questions about how he should do things. And that got him out of his conceptual box, far out of it, right? It broke way out of it easily, because it was pretty obvious that within his current comfort zone he couldn't achieve that. So that's great. In that way, to the extent that it's getting you out of a conceptual box, great. However, I'm going to be giving you enough of a foundation that you're going to live outside of the box, and you're going to be standing on the right foundation where there's not really boxes so much anymore in the first place. You only needed to think in terms of boxes when there's no foundation, when you haven't figured out the final foundation. So I'm going to make it relatively unnecessary to make goals challenging in a lot of cases. Because remember, you already have the overall goal of max happiness. And remember, max happiness, you could still continue with more good even if you achieve the beginning thing. But when you have that, then everything else becomes a strategic objective, and then you more want to identify the right strategic objective rather than just trying to make one challenging. And you can even still ask yourself questions, if I had already achieved that objective, what would the world look like? Or I'm talking to myself as having already achieved my objective, and what advice would I give myself? That's valid in my model or in this model or whatever. So that remains valid. But the goal challenging can be misleading. It can also double as just, this would be observed if everyone, like I point out, has this counterproductive additional goal that's always kind of jumping up and interfering, which is our goal for our to reinforce our existing self-image. Then if we were observing people needing to reinforce their self-image and seeing what they did, then we would observe that they wanted their goals to be challenging because that reinforces their self-image as someone that overcomes challenges. You see, when we can dissolve the whole self-image thing, then we don't need to make a goal challenging just to get our self-image goal on board with our other goal. You see, like if we have a goal to make $10,000 a month, then if we also have the goal to reinforce our self-image, then we want a goal strategy to bring our self-image goal on board with our goal to make $10,000. So we need to make the goal challenging to like reinforce ourselves of like, yeah, we're a guy or a gal who overcomes obstacles successfully. The bigger the obstacle we overcome, the more it means we're already great. So that correctly gets that on board, but if we don't need to get that guy on board, it's like if you have someone on your team that is just trying to achieve something totally irrelevant to your main team objective of making money, then yeah, you might need to bring him, and then if you didn't want him to get in the way and interfere, you might need to give him something to do, right? Or if you have a young child, you might have to give them something to do so they're busy and they don't interfere with you as you're trying to rank your website. So that's part of what the challenging thing does, and it's unnecessary. We dissolve the need for that part of it. For example, like goals can be plenty challenging in and of itself, right? There's enough challenges in the world without trying to add or make things more challenging than they have to be. I rather like let's suppose you're a black ops operative, and you're trying to rescue some hostages. You don't need to find a way to make the goal even more challenging, right? You just want to get those hostages rescued. Or you don't want to put additional obstacles in your path or to come up with some second objective that you're going to do that makes it even harder, you see? So, or we had an issue come up where our son was, who was 3 at the time, he would like to walk to like Walmart, which is pretty close by. And they have a toy section, or CVS is across the street from it, and they have a toy section. And he would kind of get used to going to this, buying something when he went to the store, or think that was kind of the purpose of going to the store. First he'd want to go out and do something, then he'd want to go to the store. It's kind of fun, and then look around and buy a toy. And of course, it's normal, right? Kids, when they go to stores, they want to get something in the store. Because also when they go with their parents to a store, the parents are always going to a store to get something, right? Parents don't typically just go to stores just to look around unless they're browsing sometimes, but typically they're getting, especially when you have a kid with you, and you don't really browse that much, right? That's not a luxury you can afford when they're young. So that kind of kid, they mostly observe you buying stuff. But then the temper tantrums, right? And he would feel upset and he would want to buy something really badly. And so that wasn't making him happy, wasn't making us happy. We wanted to dissolve that. And all the suggestions that are out there there wasn't really very many helpful things. They would mostly like involve, well, threaten him better, right? Or, keep refusing so he gets the picture or something like that. But that wasn't doing it at all. And I'm not personally interested in just threatening him at all, really. I don't interact with my son that way. I understand doing things that way, and I'm not being critical or not of that at this moment, but I just don't. And I also just don't need to, because of what I understand. I'm able to accomplish my objective, so to speak, with him without doing that. Without all the stuff I understand here, I wouldn't be able to do it. It'd be hopeless, and I'd have to threaten. But anyhow, it wasn't working for my wife. She was having an issue with it, and I was having an issue with it. He would get upset if we didn't buy him something. And so there isn't really room there. If we look at dealing with that issue in this framework, it's not really going to help at all. So you see what I mean, where this also just kind of appeals, is kind of involves like a narrow set of circumstances. I don't want to make that more challenging for myself, right? It's enough of a challenge as it is. And I don't really need a reason like bigger than myself or anything like that to create motivation. I'm plenty motivated. I just wanted it solved. And I mainly brought that up just to illustrate that a lot of goals, like the goal to have that issue go away, it doesn't really apply to try to make it more challenging. And there even was kind of an issue with motivation with solving it. I mean, what ended up happening, I could have just not been that motivated to solve it. I sort of was motivated to solve it, but I also have other things to work on in my life, and so whether it was a priority or not is an issue. So really what we want here is to make it easier to just and have an effective way to solve it. There's something I understand, which I've shared with you, which by understanding the issue of helplessness, right, and that's just unbelievably important. Figuring that out is really what makes this session of alchemy differently possible, is showing us that our deepest goal by default, our whole belief system is built by default around this idea of our mind concluding that we're helpless, which is false, but it concludes that when we're an infant, and then it concludes that the only way to deal with that is to accumulate resources that make us more powerful in relationships and so forth. And then on top of that, it has the defense against the defense, which is the real issue, where we can't even acknowledge that we're inherently assume we're helpless. We need to want to believe that we're powerful. Once I see that, then I understand that what needs to happen is the solution has to involve a temper tantrum comes from this place of feeling helpless, like there's no root. And so I successfully solved this issue, which is a real, problem. And all the solutions weren't really out there. We did look at places that gave advice, and none of them were effective, really, for this. But I solved it, and for months it's been solved. And I did it with an allowance, which is a thing. It's an idea that's out there, but not for people who are 3, generally. And whenever I bring up this issue to people, and there might be plenty of people out there that would think of this, but no one actually that I bring it up to mentions allowance as a potential solution. And so I just started giving them an allowance each week, and at 3, and it's been wildly effective. 100%. The tantrums have stopped. Once in a while, he'll kind of want something outside of that when he's already spent his allowance, but he doesn't throw a tantrum. When I point out he doesn't have the money yet for it, then he's okay. And he no longer feels helpless. Someone doesn't have to feel powerful in order to not feel helpless. See, that's another thing I realize, is that not feeling helpless isn't about feeling more and more powerful. It's just about having some root, something, some amount that you can work on. So by removing by giving the allowance each week, it removed the helplessness. We spend less, not more, on toys for him. And he learns resource management, decision making, and gets to buy him stuff. We aren't conflicted all the time as parents, and it's just been amazing. Like every aspect of it got solved, and it's been great. And like the objection would be like maybe he's spoiled or gets spoiled. It's just isn't the case, right? With the amount that he gets, I just would have to. No one's gonna get spoiled at that amount. And anyway, there's just no drawback. It's just been purely beautiful. And that came from decades of figuring out what the heck is going on at a deep level. And it wasn't until I figured that out about helplessness that I would have been able to realize, I mean, maybe I just would have guessed it by luck, but even then it might have just been implemented in a way that wasn't quite right. It's not just getting an allowance, but understanding why to stick with it and how, and that it's okay, and so forth. There's a way that there's a strong illusion in front of it. And so it was that foundational approach that ultimately did it. Now, but back to this why a challenge, creative tension. So we don't want to do a challenge just to feed into our self-image goal. That might still help us until we dissolve that, but I'll work on us dissolving that quite soon and strongly, and really make sure we nail that together. And that in and of itself is going to free you up massively in terms of your goals. Now, creative tension is helpful. Creative tension is created by you do want to imagine whatever goal you want to imagine what the world would look like after that goal was achieved or after that problem was solved, right? Strategic objectives and problem solving, I think they boil down to the same thing. I'll think about that a little bit more to think if there's any nuances, difference. But one way or the other, your mind is your whole resource in essence. Like it contains kind of a whole bunch of your other resources, right, for problem solving. And in a sense, it kind of comes before even your financial and other resources kind of come first from ideas in your mind, right, and then taking action on those and so forth. So you do need to have your mind get that that's the problem you want to solve, or that's the objective you want to achieve. And doing this also makes sure that is a strategic objective that you do in fact want to go after. Because there's a few different things going on. There's identifying a goal, which is, again, we can reword that to identifying strategic objectives, which may or may not be temporary, right, depending on conditions changing. That's like all goals can be reframed that way as far as I can tell, except for the foundational one. You want to identify it, but then you also want to set it, which is different than identifying it, and you set it in your mind, right? You identify it where you're aware of it and you're interacting consciously, and then you also want to consciously interact with, but getting it set in your mind. And whether it's set in your mind is an objective reality. Like if you pound a nail into wood, it's either pounded into the wood or it's not. It isn't a matter of your perspective, right? It's not a matter of belief. Whether a goal is actually set in your mind, where your mind is actually working on it and prioritizing it, is an objective thing that you either accomplish or you don't, and how much of a priority it is a bit of a continuum, right? Part of having it be a priority is clearing out clutter, like I'll get to, right? So creative tension alone isn't my strategy. Clearing out clutter is a big part of my strategy. Again, like the self-image thing and so forth that we'll get to. But separately from clearing out clutter, which we're not dealing with this moment, creative tension, having more energy, having your goal be more of a priority is definitely helpful. Plus, you can just notice some things about resource management and so forth, about how you want to use your resources by imagining how the world would be after you accomplished your goal. That relates to like claiming it and experiencing it in the present tense and so forth. I don't add the part where it's like I try to believe I've already accomplished it, because that's kind of inherently contradictory. Instead, but you experience anything in the now, right? Like when you imagine how the world would be after you've accomplished your strategic objective, which is like breaking through a board, like how the world would be after you punch through a block of wood, which I actually did at a Tony Robbins pre-seminar. He wasn't there. They had him on kind of video thing, but it was in New York City, and it was good to go to. But and it was useful to see how really if you focus on the board itself, if you're like looking at the board and thinking about breaking the board by looking at the board, like a wooden board that someone's holding, then you actually generally won't punch through it. You'll generally fail, no matter how strong you are. And if you're imagining how the world would look after you accomplished your strategic objective of breaking the board with your fist, which means you'd be picturing your fist already through the board with the board already broken, then, or in the case of my son, Chance, where he's somehow he wants a toy, and he's just happy. Like somehow everything's okay regarding the situation with him wanting to buy stuff at a store. Either he doesn't want to buy anything, or he's able to buy stuff, but some way where my wife and myself are not conflicted about what to do in each instance, and where Chance is not conflicted and he's happy. And actually, when I picture that, I actually picture him having some toys when you think about it, right? Like merely denying him all toys isn't really the ideal, right? I want my son to have some toys to play with. He enjoys them. They're like $5 or $10 for a toy. Sometimes they're more expensive, and we do get him more expensive stuff sometimes. But there's plenty of stuff also for just $5 or $10 where he's like happy for days, and that really happens, and it happens consistently. He almost always does pick toys he actually will be happy playing with for a couple days, and $5 or $10 for your son or daughter or whatever being happy for a few days is like an easy, happy trade-off, right? No question there. And how do I treat myself? I do the same thing. If coffee is going to make me happy for like 5 or 15 minutes, I'll buy it for $5, right? So if my son's going to be happy for a couple days, so I actually want him to have toys, right? I just don't want him having them in a way where it's messing him up and being upset and and so forth. So you want to picture how the world works in a clear way. You obviously you picturing that happening is in the present, right? But you don't picture it like it's in one manner of speaking. You are picturing it as if it already happened, so it's in the now or even in the past or something. But you don't have to like tell yourself I already have it, because there's a way that'll to some degree break the immersion. It's not really necessary or relevant, and I accomplish goals very consistently without doing that. I can at least testify. And maybe I'll have some other thought about that in a week or two or at some point. But to further explain that idea of do I want a picture already claiming it or something. But I think that's just kind of a shortcut, or I think it's just an extra little thing added in that isn't necessary. Kind of like I have a thing about, I call like a rain dance illustration or mental picture, kind of like my local peak thing or the berries or something. But where it's correct that if you plant a seed, you water it, you give it the right sunlight, if it has the right soil, and if you do a rain dance or a flower growing or a plant growing dance, the plant will grow, right? So if you add an extra step in with steps that already work, then that whole thing will work. And so in this case, the kind of claiming that you already, or believing that you already have accomplished it, or like claiming it, is a little bit like, I think, that ritual dance or that rain dance, where it works because it incorporates other steps that work in and of themselves. So you do want to picture how the world will work after you've accomplished your strategic objective, and you can, how do you immerse yourself in that picture where it feels real to your mind, is triangulate, which means get a few details in there. Imagine maybe calling up a friend or a business partner or a romantic partner or your parents and telling them that you achieved it and how great that is, and having them say, oh, that's terrific, how'd you do that? Or if it's money, imagine you go out and you spend some of that money, and maybe you save some of that money. Or I actually look at saving as buying something. Like I'm buying having that money saved, right? So people that really like that feeling of spending money, you can kill two birds with one stone, or get the best of both worlds, so to speak, by looking at savings as something you buy. A little hint there. So whatever the strategic objective is, triangulate in. That will make it more vivid. And then you want, creative tension is going to be the difference between that objective being achieved and how the world is now. So you actually want to look at where you're at right now. Often your mind will make you feel like not looking at where you're at right now, because maybe that would hurt your self-image and make you feel dejected and so forth. But if you look at it this way, it's just creative tension. And it can cause you to devote your mind to devote more resources to the task, to the extent that you need them. Now, you don't necessarily need to have your mind devote more resources, either thought-wise and creativity, like kind of mind processing, or actual other resources like money and time of focusing and doing stuff, or whatever it might be, calling in favors and doing something where someone else is doing something for you, where you have to get them back in some way. You don't necessarily need to devote more resources than necessary. So part of looking at where you're at right now and what it would take to get to the state of the world where you've achieved your objective is to get an accurate sense of resources, right? And let me remind you that the more you understand the world in general, relating to resources, especially relating to your major resources, what are the major resources? Obviously money, time, but even that you can understand better in terms of focus, creative focus of your mind, your own conscious attention, and whatever else time, your body moving around. Other time actually can be broken down into a whole number of things that where you understand it better. And that's true of many resources. And again, that's alchemy in action, breaking things down into their components. Ideas are a resource, but bad ideas will actually burn resources, right? So that means that distinguishing bad ideas from good ideas will help with your resource management and help you take more advantage out of from your resources, right? And you can come up with more resources. Relationships are, why do I focus on these things, right? These are obviously major resources in life. Relationships, mind, ideas, distinguishing good ideas from bad ideas, time, and all the different time things that again, like I listed, the time can involve, which is a whole bunch of things, different timelines. Obviously money I mentioned. But those are the major resources. That's why those are the things we deal with in alchemy, right? And alchemy, again, is about combining those things to get what you want. But part of it is looking at life that way. So that creative tension is good, and then it also gives you, but you want it to be appropriate to the task. You don't necessarily want a ton of creative tension about something that isn't a priority. And the more you understand about how creative tension gets created, then the more you can not have it about things where you don't want it and more have it for things that you do. And I'll look to make a note about that in the future. Okay, I think I will end the monologue portion here. I had it in mind to potentially be 40 minutes and go through 4 slides. That didn't quite happen this time, but that I dropped that particular strategic objective partway through or early on. But I'll continue to take a look and see if that type of organization might guide me. But either way, I'm quite happy with how this all unfolded. And let's go to the phones. Let me see if anyone wants to get in. No, we're good. And I will refresh. And we can all talk together now. Excellent. These are from an hour ago, but just getting a sense. David has helped me focus on deep strategy, resource management since day one, and the magic days literally changed the game, yeah. Yeah, we actually really did. There's a whole number of terms in magic and ideas that realistically speaking definitely came from Mike and myself. I'm looking forward to understanding this deeply, yeah. Rushed home from traffic, fighting to be here. Very excited as re-listening to 1 to 5 has started to take effect and show real results. Excellent. Love to hear that. Love to hear it. Glad you made it. Just beginning to re-listen as well. Thank you, Shima. So glad didn't be... Thanks, Dave. Appreciate that. I want to get to some cancer researchers. I think if they understand my techniques, I might be just totally all wet with this, but I somehow I think that if I were to focus on curing cancer, I think with the methods, it'd be very doable. Love that car. Yeah, I appreciate that. Wow. Yeah, definitely wow. Oh, I meant to say that what made me think about sharing the car was the Rock You Like a Hurricane came on when I was riding in the Wraith today. There's 16 speakers in the car, which is definitely a good number of speakers to have in your car. And soundproof too, so or almost entirely no sound from outside, so it's really something. I think it might be about the best place on earth to listen to sound in a Rolls Royce, like music. Maybe a music hall somewhere, but even then, you know, it's kind of big and acoustics and other people are in there. and you can't pick your music as well. Would love to have Rolls Royce as my grocery getter. It's doable. It's doable. If you have to, I can't. Are you married, John? I can't remember. But your wife has to have a decent car first. give you one hint. But it doesn't have to be a Rolls Royce. Most people don't want to drive cars that are like $400,000. It makes them nervous. Need my no fear video to go along with it, with everything. Awesome. Yeah, they look. Yeah, I can't. I can be humble in general in life and be humbled by many things, but there's no question that the cars look good. I can't try to deny that. When people say, "Oh, that car looks great," I have to say I can't disagree. True that the mind keeps making us feel like something is wrong when we're tending. Absolutely, but that can and I think will change over time with alchemy. I think I can get us there where it's rewired properly. Alchemy, major key alert. Yep, absolutely. Keep digging. All the best gold is under a lot of dirt. Yep, absolutely. But we're struggling now to kind of end a lot of the struggle where we won't need to struggle that much long term. The more we internalize this seeking understanding thing, the more life can be about building that way. And really, there's just often not a lot of struggle. Pretty much my struggle comes down to helping like other people not feel difficulties and issues. There's very little without that. Love all the civilization games. They help me put business management into perspective, how to manage employees. If only you could just give people enough food and temples, right? And they'd be happy. In real life. Create a plan, stock supplies, cost of need, excellent. The high-speed pace made real life seem so much easier to deal with in real time. That's terrific. I like it. There's also this game, Cash Flow, with Robert Kiyosaki. Yeah. What I remember from that is where he says that, like, divorce, lose all your money. It's not like you lose half of your money. It's like you lose all of it. Yeah. So one of the things you want to try to get right, is getting the marriage right in the first place. Which I mean, that involves a little bit of luck, but I did that intentionally. I tried to get that right from the get-go, and I was successful. I'm not saying that I had full control over that being the case, but I did set things up to be in very good shape when I did that, and it worked out. David Mills, money seems to matter least and sometimes most when I ask, how do I win? The need of happiness could require very little of money except for its impact on relationships and expectations. On the other hand, I have a granddaughter with a rare form of genetic disorder with many unknowns and knowns that include a severe level of autism. $1 billion could actually be used for research for cancer, yeah. I like this question. Let me stop here for a second. Part of it also relates to your own talents, I would say. I think about this sometimes. I'm not going to try to claim like I had this all figured out. But I think this will be interesting. So I have some thoughts that might be kind of interesting and helpful. I think that some of us, we can really just keep making more and more money and put that towards things that could be helpful. Now, money in and of itself, as to understand that resource, I think a good way to understand it is it's going to adjust the priorities and motivations of other people, right? And I think that's about the limit that it can do, right? I think that fully captures it, but I may be a little bit off on that. Just I say that if I haven't like thought something through so clearly that I'm, I just want to be a little bit careful. But if you think of it in terms of that it can adjust the priorities and motivations of other people, then that can, mostly what that's going to do is create more good. So there's two different tracks. I keep referring to this, and I also keep meaning at some point, or not keep meaning in a good way. I don't mean like I meant to earlier or anything, but it's a critical distinction to see good on one sliding bar, not scale, but bar, or track, and bad on another. And bad comes from contradictory, like inherently false because they're contradictory, ideas in people's minds. Money is not going to get rid of those. Money can adjust priorities, so people may not act on some bad ideas like quite as strongly, right? It might kind of temporarily stave things off for sure. So it can buy us some time sometimes regarding bad ideas, but it's not going to solve bad ideas. For that, we need to get rid of them in our own minds more and more, and ideally completely, and spread that on a personal one-on-one level, essentially. And sometimes more than one-on-one, but at least like on a level of our lives, in order for you to have the, and this helps to explain even more about what I mean by the objective of winning, right, of where we get rid of bad, is you want to get rid of all the contradictions in your own mind. And there's going to be a lot to start with just from, obviously your mind came from the stuff out there, and we all live in the same world, and there's a lot of wrong ideas out there. And there's a lot of right ideas that are kind of hidden by not being mentioned, like the idea of the importance of how to know what's true. It's kind of assumed away. So that in and of itself is a bad idea. You want to get rid of those in your own mind. As you do, you'll naturally spread the dissolving of these contradictions to other people. And then you can focus on spreading them more or less. But we know you can't literally spend every moment of every day spreading these dissolving contradictions, right? You have to sleep, eat, and you spend some time with your family. So since you can't spend every moment, then it's a little bit arbitrary how much you spend. But the good news is you'll automatically be doing it consistently by getting rid of the contradictions in your own mind. And then understanding even better maybe how to communicate, and communicating that more to other people, which involves understanding other people's minds and so forth, mind in general and then other people specifically. And some of this is going to take specifics for an individual person, right, to help them navigate, and it can be like a one-on-one thing often. I have that mental model it's only a metaphor. I'm not talking about actual demons or not one way or the other. But if you imagine each person kind of being under attack by demons, again, metaphorically, and generally everyone's kind of not overcoming it. They're kind of being kept down. Then if even one person got out from under that, then they'd be able to go to someone else who's battling and help them. Now there's two of them, they can help fight. And then that can gain steam, right? The more people. At first, like everyone can kind of help one person, and then maybe it can go to the point where multiples could, people could split off into groups and helping others and overcome, so that they're winning, right, rather than losing that battle. And it's interesting that there's kind of two stages to it, where there's getting to the bottom of things with the foundational ideas, and then there's building back up, getting rid of all the contradictions in your mind. And those are two separate objectives. And the main thing I'm trying to get you to in alchemy for sure is that foundational thing where you're standing in the right place and you have the right method for dissolving bad ideas. And then we'll build plenty of stuff up together, but we're not going to presumably this summer get rid of every contradiction in my mind or yours. But those are two different stages, right? But we can achieve the first stage. That's pretty cool. So money can stave off people acting on bad ideas, or hire mercenaries, so to speak, to stop them in extreme circumstances, with violence or even death. But otherwise, it can help be an exchange of value for more and more good stuff. It can do science. It can help with the scientists, but maybe there's even miraculous ways to get rid of. Maybe a lot of us have a potential talent for healing others spiritually, right? There's so many stories out there that it's hard to discount them all, and even things on video and so forth. Where each individual one you can maybe say, maybe there's an explanation, but anyhow, it's possible, right? And I even would think it's probable just based on what I've seen, that people can heal through prayer, and there's some people with a particular gift for that, perhaps. Maybe that can grow. And maybe they'll both, right? Certainly I'm happy with the scientific route as well. I like to try every angle and multiple angles. Anyway, that is, and so in terms of money, some of us tend to have talents where it really lends itself, where we can keep on making money and it works well for us. And some of us might have talents where it doesn't lend itself to being paid as much in the same way. And then all of us might need to have a stable base of income, although through charity and volunteer charity, then I distinguish that from, from like government stuff that's coerced. But then even some people with talents where and callings that there's kind of not a good way to pay them at all, then charity might take care of stuff like that, right? And even stuff like military defense and policing. I'd like to see that be a charity thing, so it wouldn't be based in extortion and violence like it is now, and instead it would be based in love and caring, which is where charity comes from, that place, right? So a charity-funded police force would be rooted in the foundation of caring and love, and that might be, or definitely would be, a nicer foundation. Anyway, that's just some thoughts about that. Thank God. That would probably, I'm sure that was very, very applicable to what was being said an hour ago. Hello, sir. Okay. Dave Keyes, it's an important question what we should do in this world. Even those who believe the world is destined for judgment are compelled to make it better. Right. And as a quick bit of an aside, even the Christian idea of like there's a day of judgment, I'm not going to quit until everyone's happy. So I'm not that there isn't logically there's a flaw somewhere to the idea that at some point people are like that God's going to kind of give up on us. Now God does have to suffer through all the suffering in the world, and if you feel like you have certain enemies, I understand that I have people that are in effect mortal enemies of me by their choice, like they're my mortal, but and I, again, in some circumstances might go all the way and theoretically speaking, I don't know that it would actually happen for me in my actual life, but kill them or whatever. But any suffering, God would have to feel too, right? So, but unless someone can prove otherwise, I'm looking to get everybody and get everyone taken care of. And I don't buy into any philosophy that involves me just kind of waiting things out or copping out. I'm not saying that any action philosophy does that, but if anything was interpreted in a way where we just kind of wait and pass the time and just kind of try to do good until then, but even then we're just under God's grace and it doesn't really matter how much good we do. In practice, our mind just takes over and it's arbitrary at that point. And so I think it's completely in line with Christianity to be looking to get rid of all contradictions, all bad ideas, and spread that. Anything that's true will reveal itself anyway by doing things that way, right? And good will come out. When we think about things like Judgment Day and so forth, we're focused on things we can't know. And we could say, well, God said it, can't we know because God said it? But, I mean, there's a way that we're having to interpret things, right? I mean, we're going from like some very short, fairly obscure statements or possibly metaphorical statements. So there's a way that we don't know it foundationally exactly what's going to happen. And what's the law of implication is you focus on what you can know and build from there. And so I don't need to know, I don't know about that, and I don't need to focus on that. Instead, I do know that I want to understand better and better what's true and good and dissolve contradictions and so forth, right? And have greater happiness for people and such. So I know that, and so and there's clearly no contradiction there in between that and anything God would want. And so I focus there instead. When you say look out over or look into or be aware of the goalscape, yeah, I might have not fully, well, I touched on that a bit. I think I kind of said what I meant to say there for this webinar, where it's like I'm standing on the one goal, because you have to stand somewhere, and if you try to believe you can't stand anywhere, then it's not going to work. and then I'm looking out, and the rest of it is strategic objectives. Now, I talked about the idea of a mindscape. The mindscape is kind of the same thing, except for you're not standing on the real goal. You're just kind of standing on an arbitrary goal, and where the mindscape or the goalscape feels real in a way that it shouldn't. And real is actually ends up being logically identical to foundational. And so in the mindscape, it's like the strategic objectives are foundational, but they're not. But they're mistakenly seen to be. So you don't want to be having a perspective or be in a way that's the mindscape. So if strategic objectives, if goals that aren't the main goal seem so real that they have to be achieved, when if you step back, they clearly don't. Anything that's logically derived, like that's basically identical or necessary based on the fundamental goal, like the fundamental goal of happiness, and then the idea that we need to understand the method of how to know what's true, for example, would be an example of something that's built on that foundation, and that we want to understand mind better and better. Those are built on the foundation logically, so those are real and foundational in a way. But something like, I want this person to like me, or I want this person to do this thing, or I want to make X amount of money, that is, or especially by this amount of time or by this date, that's not foundational. And if it feels like it is, then, or even goals about your self-image, right? I want to be smart. I want to already be smart. I want to already be good. Then I want to already be competent. That's not foundational, that you're already that way. Right? As a matter of fact, foundational should be you're seeking, you already know you're not. If you were strong enough and understood enough and powerful enough, everything would be perfect, right? Either you don't care or everything would be set right. So I know I don't have enough understanding, I'm not powerful enough or good enough yet, because everything's not perfect. And within my idea of perfect is there could be even more good. So that, again, is worked in. Let me look back at your question. When you say look out over, or look into, or be aware of the goalscape, what is the activity that's taking place? Are you doing something called visualizing or imagining? It's a little bit more like, to me, it feels like doing sort of logic. What is that? Let me make that into one of the questions that I want to take note of to explain better. But after I take note of it, I'm going to still take another minute or two to think what I might come up with. But what activity? Let me think here. So I'll do a little bit of thinking out loud here so you can watch the messiness and progress for a moment or two or three. So let's see. If I am, let's say I'm working on something, either a game or something for work or whatever, in my basement office, and chance knocks on my door to my office. Then I might stop and think about the goalscape. So what am I doing? I'm thinking about chance and what he might want, and then I'm thinking about what my current strategic objectives are and priorities, and I kind of relook at my priorities for that moment. Excuse me. I relook at my priorities based on the new information that happened, which is chance knocking. And I'm aware that one of my goals is, or objectives, or whatever, those are basically synonyms. I'm using that to just kind of be explanatory when I use the other word, is that I generally like to spend at least about an hour of time with him. And I'm not trying to hit that minimum. I'm not treating it like a minimum, but I'm just treating it like a certain, little bit like a line on a highway where I'm trying to stay within. If I have to cross over it for a good reason, then okay. Meaning if I have to spend less on a particular day, then that's okay. But I don't just meander outside the lines on a highway for no reason, right? Like by default, I stay within it, unless there's a clear reason that I think about using the goalscape, why I would spend less. And if and there's plenty of times when I'd spend more. If also taking a look at the goalscape, it looks like a good thing for that day, for any number of reasons. And none of these things are known for sure, right? You can't know for certain that it's better that day to spend an hour and 10 minutes rather than 15 minutes or rather than 2 hours, right? So instead you just kind of look over things, understand you can't know for certain, and make your best judgment. But always be seeking understanding in general. And the more you understand, the better, the less gray area there is to have to guess within, right? So yeah, so I'm looking at him, I'm thinking about his goals and how he's going to feel about things. And I don't look at it from the point of view so much as like, oh, he's going to throw a tantrum and I'll feel bad. I don't really have a worldview where I feel guilt or things like that. So I'm not really trying to avoid feeling bad by spending time with him. But I'll basically look at how important it is that I do things right now versus a little bit later. If I'm on a particular roll and it's the morning and I think that if I interrupt myself then that I'm not going to get back, or if I feel like while I'm spending time with him, I'm really going to be pulled back to what I'm doing. And it's going to, if it'll kind of get stored, like kind of like neuro-linguistic program or neuroassociative conditioning from Tony Robbins, where if I'm kind of not going to really like it because I really feel like I want to be doing something else, then I'll continue with what I'm doing. That's all a little bit fluid. You could say, well, David, can't you drop the goal no matter what? In one sense, yes, I could try to drop a goal while I'm with him, but in another sense, there's a reality to the world where if I'm going to be rushed later or if I'm going to feel a little bit like a number of things are hanging over me, it's hard to say whether it's because my mind isn't under enough control yet. If I understood better, then I could deal with that even better. I think that's correct. But I also am dealing with, with a certain amount of realism. And anyway, I kind of look over that way. Most of the time, I'll take some time and spend time with them, especially if it's in the afternoon. And I can readjust my plans a little bit and that sort of thing. So maybe that gives an idea. We think if there's one or two other things. So I'm aware of one of the things that people do fairly often is that they're caught up in their mindscape and the goals of other people, like other people's mindscape or goalscape, depending on how they boil down to the same thing for someone else. I think, right? Maybe it's more like a goalscape for someone else if they themselves are more aware of it and thinking about it strategically, and that might be relevant. But in terms of how it's laid out right now, it's laid out that way right now. Oh, because whether it's a mindscape or goalscape is more a matter of whether you're looking at it as if the mindscape is foundational the way it's currently configured, which is wrong in most cases, versus if you look at it as more fluid and arbitrary, potentially arbitrary, and maneuverable based on, there's a certain amount of reality to it, but not totally fixed to the goalscape. So that's more of whether it's mindscape or goalscape. So when you're thinking about somebody else, you can think about whether they're going to be able to be fluid with their goals, and I do take that into account. And generally, people aren't that able to be fluid with their goals, or I don't want to risk it. And so I'm thinking about what their goals are likely to be, including it's complex, right? And as you understand, the things we'll cover and been covering in Alchemy, including the self-image goal, that's a big one for people. And I'm aware that that's going on for people. Plus, when you understand the helplessness thing and the defense against the defense with helplessness and wanting to feel powerful, not wanting to feel helpless, and not wanting to feel like they're defending against feeling helpless, then taking all that into account for other people is part of being aware of the goalscape. And anyway, that gave you a little bit of in the moment, me, how I think about it, and so forth. What if you feel rushed because you're old or ill or both, and have a sense you don't have much time left? I always want to get back over to where I'm trying to understand things and deal with things foundationally, right? It's going to be more efficient. So I don't think it really makes that much of a difference. I think that they still just want to take care of their basic needs, and then still be seeking understanding, and maybe prioritize seeking understanding even more if you don't have much time left. And ultimately, remember, I don't know that it's not the case that we don't have multiple lives on Earth, and so then we would always have more time left until we all get it figured out. Again, I'm not trying to push that idea at all. I'm not saying I know which one's the case. But I just see advantages to seeing things that way and not really disadvantages. But again, I like to be, careful about things like that. This is so solid, foundational. Thank you, Megan. I've been applying the 2013 success formula for several weeks now. Lots of little breakthroughs, and that has to do with the creative tension and what I covered in this, with imagining that you've already, or what the world would be like after you've already accomplished your goal. And then I talk about focus, desire, faith, or focus, desire, belief, where you focus on that, and then feel like you want it. So you're kind of plugged into a motivational source, and then you believe that it's possible. So that you're not blocked by belief. Non-belief can serve as a block, and that gets rid of the block. It's a bit of a shortcut because it's not totally foundational, but it will break you through all sorts of stuff that that's kind of within your reach without going all the way to the bottom of things, but just getting out of the box or that you're in. That can really help you with that. Everything is getting easier with less resistance to doing thinking. Wonderful. So glad. Can you give an example of what you mean by standing on a goal? Yeah. When you're standing on a goal, then you are looking at that as kind of your main priority goal right then. And then you're looking at everything else through that lens. Like if I want to get to $10,000 a month income, or I want to get to $3 million total dollars and have my financial life taken care of for the rest of my life that way. And if I can stand there, and you can do this temporarily, stipulatively, by stipulating, because ultimately you want to stand on the main goal. But you can stipulate that, and you can look out at other things and say, if this was my main priority, if I'm going to go after this no matter what, if I'm going to do whatever it takes to achieve this goal, then how do my other goals and resources, and how do I use my resources, how do things align from there? And look at kind of everything else in life through the meaning that creates. That would be an example. Creative tension, a manner somewhat like sexual tension. Possibly. I mean, something that motivates you, like with energetically, or that where your mind feels like, that feeling when you have something coming up or something you want to achieve, and it's like on your mind, and your mind is feeling tugged toward that, and you're having goals towards it, and sometimes it manifests itself, unfortunately, as like having conversations in your head because you want someone else to like get something. Well, then you're having conversations in your head with that person, then your mind has creative tension about the person getting this thing. And that probably happened by imagining almost even intuitively or half subconsciously or fully of the person, what it would be like if they did get it. And then seeing that they don't get it now. It kind of happened kind of automatically for you, and then you have this creative tension, and your mind is devoting resources to that, even if you might not want it. But then if you harness that in a good way, then your mind keeps pulling you toward devoting resources and having ideas towards a goal that you do want, if you create creative tension the right way. Did you give us the example that a mother doesn't need motivation to take care of her child? That was a good one. Somehow I'm not quite sure exactly from the way you phrased that of what you mean. Did you give us the example that a mother doesn't need motivate? And that was a good one. I need you to clarify that question a little bit better. But right, you don't need to make it more of a challenge, right, in order to be motivated to take care of your child, for sure. That might be part of what you meant there. That's an example of where you don't really need to make things necessarily more of a challenge. People ask me sometimes about self-sabotage and so forth, and I'll get to things that'll dissolve that for either fully or to a good degree, for you, depending on how fully you kind of build it for yourself. I'm trying to think how that. Because when people, the thing about wanting to overcome challenges can be a real problem, and that also relates to this idea of your self-image. But you don't really want to be creating obstacles for yourself. If you, instead of making things more challenging for yourself, you can just help someone else more, right? You don't need to, you don't want to see life as putting obstacles in front of yourself. There's enough real problems rather than creating your own. But people really do create their own problems all the time, right? I did the same thing with my children. There you go. See, Zenith, I thought I was so smart, and Zenith had me figured out way in advance. And they never had tantrums. Exactly right. Great. Excellent. Good parenting. Also, when they started hitting each other, I instituted that they had to pay $2 for the opportunity to hit rather than seek another solution. After a couple of times of having to pay their brother, feeling justified. Oh, that's great. Thank you, Zenith. I will remember that and very possibly apply that. Although we planned for Chance to be our one child. My wife is totally satisfied with the one. And I'm satisfied with any number starting at 0, so that works out well. Parenting with Love and Logic, awesome program for interacts with people. Okay, I'll check it out. Great. We use Love and Logic too. Super. Excellent. Okay, I'll check it out. Mike posted a video of Chance driving a Lamborghini that he got him. It's a toy Lamborghini. Just got in, so glad we're still on. Hello. Hey, Thomas. Thanks again so much for your testimony in the webinar. That's great, Michael. I just recalled how when I was very young and trying to learn to ride a bike and ran inside and told my mother I rode my bike when I hadn't. She said, let me see that. And we went outside and I rode the bike for her. Oh, that's fine. Yeah, you wanted, at that point, well, that gave you a different reason to make the goal, and that obviously helped you overcome. Well, that's an example, right, where if there is, it is correct that if there are blocks, you can add more motivation and energy and motivation in order to overcome those blocks. The problem with that is sometimes you'll just crash a lot harder into the block, right? Like if you speed up because there's a wall, because that will help you often, or if there's like a small barrier and you think I'll speed up to get through there, you may well break through the barrier and it'll work, or you might just crash really hard. And ultimately that just takes more energy and resources that could be used somewhere else. So so the more you're able to break down, and because a lot of times you break down blocks and it's a block that would have come up over and over again, and so you break it down now, it's broken down forever, and then you don't need as much. But in this case, that's what you did, is you applied more pressure in order to overcome a fear that you might have had. My wife's already picked out her Bentley. There you go. And you can get a used Bentley for like $80,000 or something probably at this point. Or, I mean, you can get it for whatever, but for example. So OMG, money needs to rise to meet that goal. Then I could shift focus to Rolls Royce. Great. Maybe get some annuities in there first and so forth, some cash for a while, and then go for the Rolls Royce. But if you do have the extra cash, you'll get something. It's pretty interesting. My apologies. I had a long night. Yeah, and I didn't get quite to the motivation thing, but I have an answer ready for that too. But I'm going to generally keep these to about 2 hours. Thanks for answering my question. And I'm not even done yet, believe it or not. Whole webinar, not even done. When you speak about resource management, would this be similar to the 80-20 rule? It's one of many, many, many things. But the reason I brought up resource management is because when you stand on resource management and you look at the rest of life, it forces you to realize that you need to dig deep and figure out more and more about foundational stuff about life in order to understand resources, right? Because how do you figure out how to allocate resources unless you understand them? And the more you understand the different uses for resources and the different resources that are out there, then the better you manage your resources. So the proper understanding of the proper realization from resource management is it logically leads to this foundational way of looking at life that I'm trying to lead you to, or you may have already gotten to before or after me talking about this. You see, so resource management I'm using as a gateway drug or gateway as another angle on why foundational is where we want to go. Because how can we say that we understand resources if we don't understand more and more foundationally? Also, Tony Robbins just teaches RPM, resource something management, which that one he might have coined after I haven't studied him much recently, which focuses on specific results first, results maybe, then purpose, and then massive action. Got it. So R for results, purpose, and then massive action. Let me see if I have any initial quick thoughts about that. Specific results first, then the purpose or why it's most important to us, and then finally taking massive action. And main thing that I'll say now is there are blocks. Tony mostly focuses on getting yourself more revved up and powerful to break through issues and just basically fully helpful in that way. And then what I'm adding is dissolving in particular, and more than just that. But you do want to take massive action often. But first of all, when you understand thresholds, you want to take enough action to make sure you achieve the objective, but you don't necessarily need to take more action than that. Again, resource management, you take a look at phrases like massive action, and you say, wait a second, I want to take enough action. I want to devote enough of the resource of action and everything that entails to be assured of getting over the threshold, or be reasonably assured of getting over it if it isn't really going to be that smart or reasonable to try to guarantee it. Maybe I just want to give myself a pretty good, or I assure that I'll get over the threshold of achieving a particular objective as long as the universe doesn't change radically, right? As long as all the banks don't crash, or whatever, right? So again, massive action kind of ignores resource management in a sense, and then it assumes there's always these obstacles. And Tony talks about pain and pleasure. Pain is necessary to overcome pain, like an obstacle, like the pain if you have the pain of fear, or the pain of rejection, and pain of all these self-image things. But the more you can dissolve things like that, then the less you need to use massive pain to help yourself. And then even if you do use pain, you'll get more bang for your buck out of it the more you dissolve. You would hose down the coals before walking on them. That's great. I love it, Mike. That's terrific. That's great. That's basically I can't disagree. Or just not walk on them. But I was reading an article about that, and I was thinking this very week, about the fire walk that Tony Robbins does. And I'm not actually mocking the fire walk. I think that it can help be a metaphor for people in a way that can be helpful. But for me, that's one of the things about the God exists thing that's another reason for you to take it very seriously. For me, understanding how to know for sure that God exists, it's like the firewalk, in that it's also a metaphor for, whoa, if I can know that God exists and everyone else out there is saying you can't know one way or the other, either the people are religious and they say you have to have faith because you can't know for sure, or they're agnostic or atheist and they're saying, well, I don't know for sure, or you can't know, or you can know, and it's stupid to think that God exists. Whatever people are saying, they're not understanding it in the way that I can show you how to understand it, or that I may already have. When you see that you see it in that way, that it's clear and you know for sure and other people don't, then you can think, wow, what else is possible? And you can also think, how do I have competition in life? If I know this type of thing and other people don't, that's that important, and they're so sure that it's not just that people don't know about God, they're just so cocksure that you either can't know or that you can know that God doesn't exist, but people are so sure of that, right? They're whatever it is, they just don't really think you need to know for whatever reason. And so if you realize that it matters to know and you do know how to know, then it's like my version of the firewalk if I can get you there. If you take it seriously enough and you don't just cop out and say, oh, I don't want to hear how you know, David, because I already know. Well, maybe you do, but I'm suspicious of that. And great if you do. And great if I showed you whatever it is, however you get there. But yeah, anyway, that's kind of my version of the firewalk is I want people to say, wow, if I can do that, then what else can I do? And if I have the foundational method that allows me to figure that out, then what else can I figure out? And how are people going to compete with me to the extent that I need to compete with people? If I have the foundational method that can do that, and all these other things, then how are people, again, going to compete with me? There's zero competition. Thank you, David. I wish you would apply this deep strategy to medical research, particularly cancer. I'd like so too. You know what it is it's like illegal. It's like illegal to do all sorts of things regarding medicine, right? And there's all these gatekeepers that are like backed up with police and violence and so forth, keeping people out and stuff like that. And then there's an arrogance that goes with that. But I hope to get, if I get to people that'll get to people and get to people that can look at things in a certain way where I think it can be figured out if people will dig in the right way. Life as deep resource management is a great insight and confirmation for me. Excellent. I'm so glad. Local peak theory applies to a lot of medical research. Oh, heck yeah. Absolutely. They recently made it not illegal to for paramedics to operate on pets, right? Including right. It used to be where they can get sued. It was illegal for paramedics to operate on pets. They got injured. They had to call a vet, and there, or else they could get attacked by law enforcement. I just read yesterday that was overturned. Can't remember on what level. I think that's even the Supreme Court level, maybe. But I might be a legislation actually that was passed. Actually, no. I think anyway. This all feels so pivotal, David. Thank you. I'm so glad. Yeah, I'm really glad with what we talked about in this webinar. I have a lot more on this subject to cover, but we covered stuff the whole way through, so great. Daily driver. That's right. That's Mike's Lamborghini. Absolutely. Keeping it real on the Lambo, Mr. Long. In and out drive-through. Yeah, there's a way that cars at that level are just kind of inspirational to people in a way that I had to, I just experientially seen it now for so long that it just sort of inspires people rather than, it doesn't really inspire competition generally because it's kind of so far out there and so far out of the box. It just kind of makes people feel excited generally. I wouldn't necessarily guess that, right? We're told that people are all jealous and want to keep up with the Joneses, but I'm not saying that doesn't happen too, but somehow just sort of inspirational to have the particularly high-end situation with the cars. Definitely you can live without it, but also it's not the negative that it's supposed to be, or it's not really a mixed bag. It just seems like people just get happy with it. David, this is great. Thank you so much. You mentioned you have learned some things from Tony Robbins, who has learned from Napoleon Hill. Yeah, he learned from Napoleon Hill. He also really learned a lot from Grinder and Bandler, right? And their neurolinguistic programming. He learned from Milton Erickson and Virginia. I don't want to get it wrong. I feel like I'll name the wrong Virginia if I guess, but especially Milton Erickson, who with the neurolinguistic programming neurolinguistic programming. I think that was coined by Grinder and Bandler, but then they so much studied. Milton Erickson is amazing as a clinical hypnotist. I have learned a lot from Napoleon Hill, and your knowledge reminds me a lot of his principles. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Francisco, very much. Thank you for LOI and Alchemy. It has allowed me to get out of the downward spiral that I was in for about 15 years. Whoa. I'm going to keep listening and breaking through whatever it takes. Excellent. Whatever it takes, like getting to whatever it takes, and not just through a credo, but by decluttering, one other thing I want to get to, of many, many things, is I want to develop for you, there's a way that by default our mind, when it goes after goals, it hedges. like just like with muscles, where there's some muscles working in the direction that you're trying to push or lift, but then there's always some muscle fibers that are working in the opposite direction. And your mind is constantly, it goes after goals in a way that's hedged. And these other goals are getting triggered and cluttering all the time. And I watch this nonstop with people. And I noticed this like over a decade ago, and I've watched it just nonstop ever since with other people. And I've gotten such benefit out of not having that happen that much for myself and being able to go after certain goals with whatever it takes by having this kind of decluttering and understanding kind of the goalscape and knowing to look for it. And I'm not saying I've done it perfectly, but I've really gotten a lot of mileage, definitely, out of mostly doing it, or to whatever extent I've done it. And there have been times that I've done it perfectly within a certain instance in time or a particular goal. But yeah, getting to whatever it takes for real is such a cool thing. And sometimes you just have the whatever it takes. I was saying it hedges, and instead what you want to do is focus on boundaries that actually open up the space in between to do whatever it takes within those boundaries. Including you can have some red flags or a certain time period that you're going to do whatever it takes for a particular strategic objective. With the overall goal, it's just for me, and presumably for a lot of you guys, whatever it takes, period. Whatever it takes to get to max happiness. There can't be anything wrong because there's that's why the boundary is important of the property rights. I'm not going to tread on anyone's property rights, period, unless I screw up and do something very immoral. But we can't say what the future is. But theoretically, at least in theory, there's no greater good in terms of sacrificing an individual's property rights ever for my strategy. So that protects it from any of that crap. Could be in self-defense, in a clear self-defense against a particular individual. But other than that, then whatever it takes for max happiness, period. One area of neglect for me personally has been around taking the time to set down and set my goals, right? Or I would say to identify and then set. And set is like set in like a mold, right? Like set in your mind, where it's really set like neurologically. Goals, right? And strategic objectives, right? To this point in time, my focus has been on constant action, and as Mike says, building, which has been working very, very well as I carry a good idea. However, the realization that without defining clear purpose-driven goals has certainly been playing on my conscience. Problem stated, solution. I can't wait to listen to the rest of your Alchemy series using all of your golden nuggets, learn how to rewire my mind. Thank you for your awesome webbies. Love them. Sorry, once in a while I skipped over a phrase here and there. But let me think if there's any few words I want to say about this. Definitely like kind of in the short term, like a particular day or even a few weeks or something, if you're kind of making great progress, you're not treading on anyone's individual property rights, and you are, building your income or something like that, then roll with it. That's cool to roll with it. But you want to have an eye toward it, not, there's a point where, yeah, you could be no longer really making the best progress in your life if you're not stopping and looking things over and having a good idea of where you're going. If you can, as a simple rule of thumb with money, you can get to like where you have a reasonable, stable base, whatever that might be, a certain amount of thousands per month. You don't want to have to get all the way to like 3 million in order to stop and think about things. That's kind of excessive there, right? But something where that's kind of taken care of. And even if you're doing that, kind of building and taking action, you could probably have some time when you'd rather just get some coffee or kombucha tea or meditate or whatever, and just think about the overall, right? But find again and flow for a bit and ride things out, ride a wave. But yeah, you want to have a good sense of the overall thing of things. And pretty much everyone's going to have some kind of that kind of self-image goal I talk about, and dissolving that's going to really be great for everyone. Could a government based on totally valid contracts work in place to tyranny? Basically, it would have to be about upholding individual property rights and not violate that in some way. And maybe I'll kind of develop on that sometime toward the end, right? I won't make that a priority right now. But there would have to be something where the thing with government, it's not so much about government. The question is more about what do we do about property rights violations as individuals, and then individuals can form groups and so forth. But there is potentially something that has to be done about property rights violations. But no solution that we come up with can make an immoral action into a moral action. So we have to stick to writing violations against a particular individual. We can't build on the foundation. So often I shortcut things in life by, like, people sometimes think, oh, I see so many moves ahead. Often all I do is look at the foundation, and if it's off, I look for the right foundation. I didn't see any moves ahead. I just looked at the foundation and got it right. Now, of course, I keep the objectives in mind. But I often don't really try to see trends. I'm not that good at it, or predicting the future, or that sort of thing. In one sense, I can play things out in my mind decently, or maybe very well conceptually in some ways. But I don't really see patterns like a lot of people do. That's not the same thing as playing out things logically in a logical progression. Patterns is more like making a pattern out of megadata, right? Like taking a lot of inputs and kind of getting a sense of the trend. And that I'm actually not that skilled at. But you'd be amazed at how much stuff I dodge by looking down, seeing I'm standing in the wrong place, moving, and then like a month later a bullet comes that would have shot me or messed up my business or my relationship or something, and I already was fine because I moved because the foundation was wrong. And so we know that we don't want a government based inherently on violating property rights to start with, which is the way governments normally are these days, is with extortion and so forth. I don't know what UCC stands for. Universal contract something? I don't know. Any sort of ideas wouldn't be enough. Like you do need something. Presumably, it would be enough. Ultimately, the only thing that's gonna get us to max happiness is dissolving bad ideas. Anything you do with dealing with property rights violations on a violence-based level is only going to be like a holding pattern. So we're never going to get all the way that we need to get to until we dissolve bad ideas and don't have them bombarding people and kill children, right, when they're born. And then as they grow up, they're getting inundated with so many wrong ideas that they hardly stand a chance, right, of course. Actually, there's no chance. Automatically, it's going to get out of their minds. And so what we can do is get to a world where that's not happening. And then it can stick around. And that can happen if we have a knife, like a distinguishing way to distinguish properly good ideas from bad ideas, or at least identifying bad ideas as inherently contradictory. And then we don't go back. Once we identify a bad idea properly, or a contradiction, once we properly see a contradiction, we don't go back. And that's why we can win. It's because we can make forward progress without losing it, without it degrading. I'll cut this short quite soon. But David, how do you dissolve the confusion in your mind sometimes? I am a strong believer in what we are seeking is also seeking us. But when it comes to activities that would actually get you making money, for example, one starts thinking that they're not good enough. Okay, I'm thinking that what you're saying is, so you're thinking maybe I should be making more income than I am. And like if we're seeking income, it's also seeking us, so it's coming to us, I believe, is what Kenny's saying. And then when it comes to activities that will actually get you making money, and maybe the activity itself isn't good enough. Maybe I'm thinking this will make me some money, but is it helping the world enough? If you're still there, Kenny, maybe you can clarify. Is that what you're asking? If that's it, I run into that. And my solution was to treat making money as a threshold phenomenon for myself and for I'm not recommending this for everyone. Some of you have talents where it's going to make sense for you to just keep on making money because you're using your talent, you're making money, it's all working well. With me, that may or may not be the case. And so, with anyone that may or may not be the case, but with me also. And so I dealt with that by saying, look, I want to get to a certain amount of money where I no longer have to do things for the money. And then I can make decisions for other reasons that have nothing to do with the money. I might still at that point be making money. And I'm using a business model with Alchemy, for example, because that, if I can make a business model with it work, that has various advantages, such as being able to pay for advertising and do stuff on TV and who knows what, right? Affiliates can be promoting. And my mind might inherently feel a little bit more motivated if I'm making some money out of it and just can get a few extra nice things or whatever. Are you confirming that that's what you had in mind, or did you mean? But anyhow, so the money can kind of be a good for me without it being a bad if I don't make it, which again, good and bad are two separate things. I wanted to get to the point where I bought the ability for money not to be a bad thing in my life for whatever reason. It's still the case that it would be bad if people just took money that I currently have accumulated. And I don't really like it when people who promise to pay me money don't, based on a service I've already rendered. But even then, I can at least chill out and be pretty calm. I'm quite calm about that. Ideally, people won't just take money they already have. You can't really do anything about that. You can't really do anything enough to assure yourself of that. But then, at least unless that happens, then money can't really be a bad thing. I kind of bought that on purpose. It's like a purchase that I made. It is if I'm ever tempted to think, oh, something regarding not making more money would be bad, then I think, wait a second, or forgetting a coupon or whatever it might be. I already bought that, where I don't have to worry about feeling bad anymore. Excellent. Oh, good. That's great, Kenny. So that's how I deal with it. Is I figured out a particular amount and strategy to get there with annuities and having my money not in equities. By the way, I took all my money out of equities like a month or two ago. That means like stocks and so forth. And of course that was the market's gone down pretty far since then. A little bit of luck, but again, I was looking to stand in a better place because I didn't really need an upside with my money. I just needed to not lose it, basically. So what good is it if I might get a 10% return, as they tell you in the stock market, or 11%? Like there's one guy that lives in my city, actually, and has a radio show and writes books and gives advice about money management, and he points out that historically in every 10-year period in the stock market you make like 11% return annualized or something. But I don't need that upside. It's also correct that at any particular time your money could just go down by like a third, and then how am I supposed to plan? And plus then you're attached to the news too much. So I realized I didn't have any benefit. Plus you actually get taxed on dividends that you get that kind of go into your portfolio inherently. And so you can actually lose more than you put in, theoretically. You can pay taxes and then lose all your money still. So I took all my money into equities because there was really no upside for me personally, and I wanted to be able to plan. And then the British voted to exit the euro, which I kind of thought was cool anyway. But I wouldn't have thought it was as cool if I had a lot of money in stocks, right? So there you go. And I'll wrap up quite soon, but David, your commitment sounds similar to, in Mahayana Buddhism, the Bodhisattva vows to work for the relief and liberation of all sentient beings as long as samsara, which I believe that meaning of that is like our current world, exists. Would you say this vow is based on the wrong foundation? One of the things with alchemy or law of implication, what I figured out, there's a way that, as far as I can tell, a few people like Buddha or Socrates have gotten to where they like ask a certain question, but they don't really get to the answer, and they kind of get to this observer, or the wiser I am, the more I know I don't know. Right? With Socrates, he never actually got to a method of how to know. That it was more like knowing that he didn't know. And then he had, his Plato came after him as kind of a bit of a disciple, and then Aristotle from Plato. And they were kind of poking around, but they didn't really they had these theories, but they didn't really get to the method. And so there's something that's, as far as I can tell, is like missing with Buddhism. and where it's not, doesn't really get foundational and concrete properly. It will be one thing to say I want to be, like, even plenty of individuals, for example, have decided they want to be happy, right, in life. They may or may not, they might even say I want everyone to be happy. Some version of that. But there's a way that they don't get it straight and foundational in a way that connects it up properly, as far as I can tell. And I'm not trying to be all superior and I'm right and they haven't figured it out. I'd love if they did. But somehow Buddhism isn't actually saving the world, in essence. And so that's kind of my kind of simple answer to that. Or like they're like trying to cultivate perfection. They're doing all these things where they're controlling their body and mind, like they can stop blood flow if they're cut and so forth. And that seems a little gimmicky, right, to do that. And it's not really a path. Like you can't, controlling your mind and body in that type of perfection, you're not, it's about contradictions, dissolving contradictions. And I don't really quite see them doing that. And they're kind of have these other things that kind of are extraneous and get in the way, and so forth. I don't necessarily have the detailed knowledge. I have some knowledge, but not detailed to the point where I want to specifically be claiming to critique Buddhism or not. But that's kind of my impression. There's something about what I'm saying that just isn't out there as far as I can tell. And every time I think something's close, it just doesn't end up really being close. The aha moments are coming. Thank you. Excellent. Love it. What's the over-under on how chance will be when he first uses the excuse chance can't cause anything? It's pretty funny. That's great. Thank you as always. The time has been incredible. I look forward. I read a book on Elon. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Can't wait to connect with you. Alchemy group. Is it live? That'll be terrific. Absolutely, Catherine. I love that sentiment very much. I read a book on Elon Musk and I was hooked. I've also read books on Steve Jobs. Something about these people really compels me to try to go to the highest heights. It may seem like I've set an arbitrary goal to reach that level of success. I might go through this more in the future as well, because I'm trying to wrap up a little bit here, and I hate to cut people short. But this looks like a good question to kind of look at and think through. God is alive and well, and we have the ability to create anything we desire. Depending on how we understand that, I would say. So I have a few tweaks maybe on that I've already discussed. That is such a great way to look at knowing God exists. Thank you. Good grief, that's funny. Yeah, well, again, we have the ability, I think, to get rid of bad and to be happy. And I think the world is rigged for that. I think that's only blocks that we could dissolve on the way to that. And then if that's what we mean, if you mean by anything we desire, then I would agree. I don't necessarily think that we can manifest just anything. There's a way that an idea of sort of unlimited power, or we can manifest anything we desire, can be interpreted in a way that I wouldn't necessarily agree with. I did the firework. It was amazing and hot. That's great. I did the board breaking, and that was good too. I'm not saying it's the same thing, but just saying I respect Tony. It doesn't mean that I agree with everything. I disagree with some things at times, and I disagreed with his relationship advice before his divorce happened, and then it happened. So, Virginia Satter. Yep, thank you. That's right. I was going to embarrass myself and say Virginia Woolf, but luckily I realized that was probably wrong. NLP is amazing for communication. Yeah, it just, for me, it didn't take me that far. It helps, and I kind of use it in a sense, almost like breathing, where I don't pay that much attention to it. But for me, with communication, I use something else, and the whole seeking understanding thing and dissolving is how I tend to communicate. And and it really works well for me. There's a way that with Tony's model, you're sometimes needing to sort of come over the top on people, and there may be a time and a place for that, and I do that maybe once in a while with people that it's very safe to do that with, where he's looking for a certain result. But there's a way that with long-term ongoing relationships, there's a method that I use that I'll develop that is pretty magical, and I think there's a uniqueness to it. Again, it's not that I want it to be unique, but if something is unique, then it matters to identify that and make sure you're not projecting something else onto it. Thank you, David, for your time and teaching. It's really making such a positive difference in my life. Thank you. Yeah, I've gotten a few really nice communications also behind the scenes on some real tough things that people were dealing with. And there's also some questions I've gotten that I also continue to want to help people with. But I can't get to everything right away. And I don't want to make things too scattered by trying to address a number of disparate questions, especially like in the main presentation part of a webinar. I feel so focused and calm after listening to you. Consider yourself hugged. Well, thank you. That's great. And yeah, because there's a way that this is something I did want to mention. With all of us, there's a way that we communicate like our deeper assumptions, right? Like our implicit, the foundation or the lack thereof that we're coming from. We communicate that. And so part of alchemy is just spending time with me and kind of getting the kind of implicit or, assumptions and ways that I act and kind of feeling it and getting it that way through example. That can't be like the only way, I would think. Like you can't just do nothing but absorb, I don't think, to get this. You have to build for yourself. But there's a way that I think that's part of my plan is by spending this time with you. There's a certain energy and thing that I'm going to help, I think, add to yours to kind of help push us over the edge, so to speak, in a good way. Not like, where you're just falling. What if I told you you could free yourself from blurriness? Great, Dave. That's awesome. Brexit, exit, EU, good for all. Yeah. No, I was glad. I can't even explain it, but I was for at least for one night, I was pretty into it. I was rooting for it. It was kind of exciting to watch the returns come in. But if anyone's has a lot of British pounds or is involved in the stock market, my condolences, and I mean that seriously. I don't mean that sarcastically at all. Certainly some people are getting hurt, at least in the short term right now. And I don't want to see that. Thank you, David, for another great alchemy webinar. You are very welcome. It's about dissolving contradictions is sinking in. Excellent, excellent. Yeah, there's a way that is one of the unique things about what you're going to get from me is, and Fletch testifies to this, and when that really made sense to him and he really started building from that and using it, he said that totally was thresholdish difference, even after he felt like he had gotten a lot out of my teachings and it really helped him already. But he said that took it to a totally different level and really let him deal with a bunch of things in his life and really, again, just totally take things to not just a linear next level, but a very qualitatively different level for himself. And I don't think you generally hear things put that way. And it's almost completely, I don't know that existing in like success literature in the way that I talk about it. And of course it may. But as long as it does, great. I just don't want you projecting, as always, or blurring something with that. Great insight for me regarding the great philosophies. They did not focus or develop a method, right, about the dissolving of contradictions. Yeah, that's what I take as well. Possibly, yeah. It's hard for me to say. I certainly disagree with the prosecution of Socrates, and I have just an incredible amount of respect for Socrates in particular. But that's interesting to see. I haven't read the book Social, but I might check it out. Okay, I'll write that down. You're very welcome. Yeah, we'll kind of wrap things down here. I won't really be answering more questions at this point. Not this time, but in the future, for sure. my wife, purely in a good way, just for planning, not to pressure me. But she was like, so you go from probably 4 to 7. I said, well, I think I'm usually trying to keep these under in 2 hours these days. Here I am, and it's 2 hours and 3/4. Can't get away once we start, right? It keeps going. You guys are addicting. Another amazing webinar. I love Alchemy. You're very welcome. How do people contact you behind the scenes? You can email Mike at OMG and OMG Machines, and he'll send things to me. If you're talking about Alchemy, I can't always promise to. I'll pretty much gonna read stuff that gets sent. I can't always respond to it or that sort of thing, but chances are it'll affect my webinars long term for sure. And the feedback is helpful. I know I haven't opened myself up for like a lot of direct feedback quite yet. I may do that at some point during Alchemy. I might want to get through, I'm opening this up to the public, I might want to get to the marketing phase first before doing that. Probably when I do that, after I do that, then I'll probably feel particularly decluttered and look to do that. We'll see. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. You're very welcome, Ernie. Thank you, David. It's clearing the clutter more and more with every webinar. Oh, I'm so glad. Truly grateful to spend this time. You're very welcome, Sandra. Yeah, it's really, really nice what people are saying in the Facebook and also emailing to Mike and so forth. Social's an excellent book. Great. I look forward to reading it. I'll take a look. I was running low on nonfiction books to read right now. You, sir, are addicted. Appreciate that. You're very welcome, Chris Lee and Brian and James. Great, you're sticking with me. I love it. I love it. Yeah, it's kind of the only thing that's difficult, so to speak, like in my head, is making sure, like thinking, okay, I want to make sure that these are at least compelling enough or coherent enough and so forth that people stick with it. I mean, I want it to be coherent for the sake of communicating well, but I know that we'll make just great strides together over this summer. But main thing I try to watch out for is that off the beaten path or off track or whatever it might be to lose people. Don't want to do that. Thank you, Bryce. Really appreciate that. Yeah, my reading list isn't that fascinating these days. I read a lot years ago, but since I discovered the breakthroughs, like with the consciousness field and the method for knowing, which I haven't even really gotten into specifically with you guys in Alchemy, I've just been developing stuff so much on my own that I mostly read stuff to kind of get more insight on like the default functioning of the mind in order to show what's wrong about it. So a lot of what I read these days is to kind of help me see like what's wrong, and I don't like to bring it up a lot, or even do it. Just I don't want to come off like I'm being critical of this and being critical of that. And anything that's out there, I figure you guys will get to and read. It's already out there. If it's particularly obscure, I'd be happy to bring it to the forefront. I can compile some of the things I read. Interestingly enough, Vernon Howard. Thank you guys. I'll go back up. Vernon Howard really helped me. I'll type the name. I get all these suggestions from Facebook as I try to do stuff. But is that going to tag someone? Hopefully not. How do I? How do you like that? There's probably some button I could be pushing better. How do I even? There we go. Got it. Tag someone anyway. Howard says. All right. How? Oh, maybe if I try this. Now it doesn't. Anyone know what I'm supposed to push in order to not tag someone when I type in a name? Anyhow, that's crazy. I know there's a way, and I've done it before, but I'm not getting it. Slavery and freedom? No, I haven't. I'll at least make note of it. I'm a little disappointed. As good as like Liberty and Tyranny is, that book by a different author, it's just, again, it kind of still accepts way too much tyranny, disguised kind of as liberty. Hit escape, then enter. Escape. Thank you. I don't know how. I thought I tried that, but obviously I didn't. I guess I was right-clicking instead. So thank you. Appreciate that. Oh, the space bar. That would have done it too. Excellent. See? We all learned from each other here. Oh, I skipped past some things. This kind of addiction is super nourishing. Super. Mike. Oh, that's a cool little image there, Mike. You're very welcome, David. Thank you. That's wonderful, everything I teach. You're welcome. Your voice has a wonderful calming effect. That's great. One person once suggested I take voice lessons as part of my efforts to make things look better, and I well might. I think it all matters, but I'll do a lot of that appearance stuff I'll do later, basically. You are an ancient sage for sure. I appreciate that. Excellent. Excellent. All right. Got everything there. I really like Vernon Howard, but I've only read, and psychopictography. I'll just say it with words in case anyone's named Psycho here that I'll tag by accident. But psychopictography was a particularly good one. He talks about getting a higher understanding and so forth. Again, I think that he hit upon the concept but didn't get to the specifics like I have, but it really helped me. It was very nice. You're very welcome. Sorry I'm having dinner with David tonight. That's awesome. Were you referring to Power of Your Supermind? I think that was one of the other ones that I got. I'm a little bit fogging out, but psychopictography was one of the main ones. He kind of says the same thing in different ways, in kind of a good way. And psychopictography is about having these kind of mental pictures that kind of reinforce the idea of having a higher understanding and so forth. But in concept, he really nails that idea. And so I kind of use that and try to get some details, and kind of figure it out, kind of fundamentally. Yeah, well, all the political divides all over the place, Bryce. They're all you start with a foundation of extortion, slavery, assault, and so forth, and you're never going to get to where you're going to go. You need to change the playing field. Like the whole immigration debate, everyone's wrong and everyone's right in essence because you start with all the wrong premises, and then everyone is wrong. And that's why mostly politics is about showing how the other side is so horrible, because when you have the wrong foundation, then everyone's wrong, right? And so then you want to believe that you're right, and it's easy to do if you just see how the other side's so wrong. And there's lots of wrong defined in all the different sides of every political debate, essentially. So that's what's going on with that. Wow, I'm so glad, Ernie. That's so great. Yeah, I know, the incredible energy, absolutely. All right. Mike had the last word there with the alchemy bottles. Thank you guys so much. Oh, super, super. I'd love to have it if we do better with it. This is just a free download that I got. Cotton, tell me about Librestock, right, .com. LIBRESTOCK. And that's been working for me well. Excuse me. You're welcome, Michael. And I still I have all kinds of I have a bunch of stuff to share about your question about mental toughness and momentum towards goals and so forth. All right, I will end the webinar here. Love to have a great Alchemy logo from Brian. And I didn't set the bar too high with mine. And you're welcome, everyone. All right, I'll make a note of that too, Michael. Yeah, it's kind of interesting about people's different books. I'm kind of glad to hear other people's and so forth. Okay, I really will stop it here, and I will see you guys. Oh, I think I've decided. Let me stop the recording.